Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Discovered the UA Spy. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. You know your assignment, right? All for One's voice came through a small monitor, cold and calculating. Toru gave a nod, but then saluted and said yes sir, realizing that her master couldn't see her. All Might will become a teacher at UA, and to take down the symbol of peace you need someone on the inside. And that'll be me. She bubbled excitedly. It was rare to get a meeting with All for One lately. Toru had heard he was in deep hiding from his injuries. Only the chosen child of the League of Villains Shigaraki usually got to speak with him. He and his right hand Kurogiri was usually present as well. Toru, however, was a special case. Although she was no longer in contact with All for One very often because of his injuries, she had been trained under him. She wasn't just a nobody looking for quick fame in the League of Villains. I'm special. I'm a tool that can be used for greatness. She liked to imagine her shape could be chiseled away to be easily handled and used. She slapped her cheeks, snapping herself back into reality. Only the sound could be heard and she knew nobody was paying her any mind as usual. This was a different meeting than normal. It wasn't one-on-one instruction. Shigaraki and Kurogiri were present as if judging her on a performance review. Shigaraki scratched at his neck. I don't see why we need her to go. Wouldn't it get us in major trouble if UA found out we have a spy? Aren't there a lot of hero investigation quirks? Don't we kinda lose by having someone go to a hero school? Toru couldn't see him through his hand, but she felt him glaring at her. She could turn after all. Those heroes are good at smacking people with their ideologies until they're brainwashed. Shigaraki, I would instill a little bit more trust in Toru. Kurogiri tried to scold, but All for One stopped him. He seemed to want to make a lesson for his favorite villain. Espionage is just as important as fighting on the front lines, Shigaraki. Without enough information we could have a defeat that could be avoided. Not only that, but the UA school is famously defended. How would we get to the symbol of peace unless someone opens the doors themselves from inside? We need a Trojan horse. Shigaraki bit at his nail, listening closely to the advice his mentor gave him. But why Toru? Couldn't we send someone else? She's the only person of high school age that we have. Not only that, but I've personally raised her for this purpose, to aid you in defeating the symbol of peace. Toru nodded along happily. This was her purpose. Let me show you your trust isn't misplaced, master. Let me prove to you, Shigaraki, that I can be a good girl. Her quirk is perfect for slipping away and getting information, or relaying information to us. Rely on my plan, Shigaraki. All for One instructed. Shigaraki bit his thumb but reluctantly nodded. Can she get into UA though? Kurogiri asked. I've heard UA's entrance exam is famously hard. He seemed to be stumbling with his words a bit. Can a quirk of invisibility defeat anything in close combat? Her quirk isn't just invisibility. It's the bending of light itself, which presents as a mutation in her body that makes her completely invisible against her will. All for One described. I'm not going to show off my full power right at the beginning though. I'm sure I can use my intelligence to beat up whatever the test sends at me. I've been asking graduates for years about the test, and even sneaking in at times to observe it. I've got a plan and I'm sure with just intellect I can make it in. Toru spoke up. Shigaraki groaned. I'm sure that go-get-tem attitude will blend right in with those hero scum. Toru frowned, although she knew Shigaraki couldn't tell. His annoyance at her, and refusal to trust her with this mission hurt. In fact, his entire thing against her hurt her feelings because she was trying so hard. I know it's just jealousy because Master's been paying attention to me too, but it still kinda hits deep. She put her hands at her hips, although the only thing Shigaraki could see was her floating long sleeves cross. You know, I've been practicing this attitude to blend in with the heroes. People let their guard down when a soothing voice and a friendly personality is present. It's not like I actually want to be a hero. Shigaraki looked skeptical. But he had made it no secret that he disapproved of this plan. Toru's identity must be kept a secret. For this reason I've had her stop interacting with others besides you two in the league, isolating her. Your mission, Shigaraki, depends on Toru's success. So I would suggest aiding her until she gets into UA. Kurogyari, you will help Shigaraki? Both of them nodded. Documentation such as a birth certificate, address, and identification has been awarded to you, Toru, in aiding with this mission. A house and money to buy food and supplies will be given to you. I trust you won't mess this up? Toru nodded again. Until the exams I will train more than anyone's trained before. After all, if a normal person fails the exam, all they've lost is their dreams of being a hero. If I fail, we have to go back to square one in the planning phase. And she'd likely be tossed aside. This was her purpose. The reason she had been given so many privileges in the league. She could be used as a spy and was of the perfect age to infiltrate UA. It wasn't because anyone particularly liked her or she was cared for. She just fit the hole that they needed. Shigaraki signed off, as if in silent agreement. Toru couldn't fail. She had to succeed. If not, what did she exist for? Toru didn't know her mother's face. When she was abandoned at 2 in the streets because her mother didn't have the skills to take care of her, she had nothing to remember her by. It wasn't because she was too young to remember the last moments with her mother. It was more because her mother had the same mutation as Toru, invisibility. There was nothing to see. Toru didn't know why she had been abandoned. She didn't think much about it. It was all too common occurrence of teen mothers not having the tools to take care of their children or a child's quirk scaring them. Children abandoned were usually picked up by heroes pretty quickly and given to social services, but that hadn't been her case. She had instead been forgotten. She had cried at first, but all her cries had instead alerted heroes of other children in trouble. Not the invisible toddler whose mother had abandoned her completely naked. Things she picked up had instead been deemed someone's telekinesis quirk nearby. It had been a number of unfortunate coincidences that gave Toru no hope that she would ever be found. She adjusted to life in the streets eventually, picking through the trash for food and following other homeless and just watching, waiting, knowing that nobody saw her. It was at the age of 5 that she had been pulled from that hell. Naked, laying on the corner of the street, completely invisible to the world. A man with gray hair had tripped on her. He had looked down at her body and smiled. It's rare that an invisibility quirk doesn't show up with my X-ray vision. His eyes had glowed for a moment. Marvelous. Even the bones are invisible. She remembered that smile. A grin so wide that it was like he was observing something truly unique and alien. Toru had looked up, hungry, lost and alone. It took her a moment to seem to figure out that the man was talking to her. She opened her mouth to talk back, but no words seemed to respond. She made some sort of gurgle in her throat. The man smiled as if not frightened away. He reached his hand down, hitting her neck. No, this can't be your head. Interesting. I think this type of mutation has too many drawbacks for me to take. The man, who Toru would later learn was all for one, smiled down at her. He pulled off his coat and handed it to her. Toru shivered and the chattering of her teeth was audible. She put the coat on, giving herself some form of a body. You're barely a human. Tell me, would you like to become a tool for me? You can exist to the world again, punish the world that's forgotten you if you so wish, but you'll become my invisible strings for society. Toru wanted to say yes, but the words were failing her. Instead, she used up all her strength and pulled herself up and took his hand. And the man led her into the world of darkness and despair known as villainy. But that didn't matter. After all, to be remembered, Toru would do anything, even if it was becoming a tool. The day came of UA's entrance exam. Many months of preparation had been placed in this plan. Toru had a daily schedule of studying for UA's written exam, going out to malls and stuff with her middle school friends to continue to perfect her nice bubbly girl routine, and having a very strict exercise regimen to keep her body in the best acrobatic situation it could be in. Kurogyari met with her regularly to give her previous year's written exams answer keys and explain things about the practical. Based on the splatter of blood on his bartender outfit, it could be surmised that the League of Villains tortured this information out of flunkies or possible graduates. Toru didn't know what had happened to these people, and she decided not to ask. I think I'm prepared decently for the written exam and practical. She had spent her whole life essential preparing after all. Really the thing she needed to practice most was socializing with normal people her age group, which she continued to prep through the middle school. All for one had probably assumed the heroes would do a standard background check on all their students, and Toru had to have some middle school experience to look legit. It wasn't all fun and games in the middle school. But the trouble middle schoolers faced all seemed so petty in comparison to her goals. As soon as Toru mentioned she was applying to UA to the teachers, her fake middle school classmates immediately turned to mocking her. "How is an invisible girl going to pass UA's tough practical?" they asked. "It's not like you're particularly strong after all. You're just invisible. She doesn't have a flashy quirk. There's no way she could do anything offensive to take anything down," the kingpin of the middle school class mocked. "Just give up on being a hero." Toru couldn't help but smile to herself. Not like any of her classmates noticed. She hadn't been in this middle school for long, only a year, with the story of that she had recently moved to the area, but it seemed like normal middle schoolers weren't particularly observant. Bullying, mocking, it all seems so tiny and pathetic in comparison to sneaking into a hero's office and stealing various files of blackmail on him. "Are you sure you want to try to attend UA, Toru?" the teacher would ask. "I can send your high school application to another school as backup if you would like. I mean, sometimes our dreams don't always happen and it's good to have a backup." "Nope. It's no problem." Toru shook her arms to let the teacher see she was shaking her head. "I will pass UA's entrance exam and become a hero. After all, I'm sure the heroes need an invisible girl like me. And if I can't beat the entrance exam, I'll prove that they're making a mistake with my great attitude." The teacher looked at her with very visible pity. "Try your best, Toru, but it's okay to give up on the unachievable," she reminded. The rest of the class hooted and hollered about how Toru's quirk wasn't a typical hero quirk. But Toru just beamed and sat like a good student. "Whatever the heroes throw at me in the entrance exam will be nothing compared to master's training or spying on various heroes," she reminded herself. Her application, of course, was accepted, although that was no surprise. UA prided itself on an equal opportunity for all in its informational pamphlets. Why, even if you were quirkless, you could at least try out for the hero exam. Toru had noticed in very small fine print it said, "If you can't pass the hero exam, feel free to apply to our great general studies programs, support or business courses." There's no shame in supporting the heroes. That wasn't her goal though. So much rided on her joining the hero course, specifically Class A, which was rumored to be the one All Might would help teach. If she couldn't do it, why so much would be lost for the League of Villains? Shigaraki likely wouldn't be able to bring down the symbol of peace, and the League wouldn't get very needed information on the heroes. "I'll show you all. I can and will become a hero," Toru announced proudly to the class, when the teacher reminded her publicly that there were other courses she could apply to at the news that her application had been processed and accepted. Yeah, the teacher didn't look like she believed her. The day someone essentially quirkless except that they're invisible becomes a hero is the day pigs fly. The kingpin student said again. "Some pigs have mutated to fly." Toru wanted to snidely comment, but decided that getting the last word shouldn't be part of her personality. Instead, she pretended to look like she had firm resolve. Her hand trembled just a bit. Not because she was scared at the exam, but because the words, "I will become a hero," were big words. It made her stomach uneasy. A hero? I'm going to have to study to become a hero. Like absolutely everyone in the League of Villains, she hated heroes. That's what she had been told to feel. And it gave her a small amount of uneasy to think she'd have to become one. Remember, Toru, the written exam portion isn't about who finishes first. It's about who has the most correct answers. Kurogyari reminded her again, taking up as her personal hero tutor personally. And the practical usually relies on both combat-heavy points and rescue points. If you don't have a combat-based quirk, you should aim to help others more than harm whatever machine-based creation UA has. Toru nodded, memorizing all of Kurogyari's words as she studied in the well-lit bar he manned. "How do you know all this?" she almost asked, but decided it was most likely torture. It wasn't like Kurogyari had undergone the exam before. After all, no records indicated a warp gate had ever tried to be a hero. She continued her preparation all the way up to the day of the exam. The day came of the entrance exam. Like many other normal children Toru's age, she arrived on campus all alone. The UA gates were permanently open that day for parents to tour the campus and for students to arrive to gain their application ID and attend the exam. It was a sunny day, with a nice breeze. Cold though since it was winter. Everyone who was walking by seemed to have big happy expressions on their faces, or big bags under their eyes, having likely spent the entire night studying. Still, they all had that classic go-get-'em attitude associated with heroes. As Toru gazed at the huge school, a hint of anxiety did enter her stomach. Not because she was particularly afraid of being injured during the exam or passing, but because of one factor. I'm going to have to do the entire practical exam. Naked. It was many normal people's nightmares to have to come to school naked. But she would have to live that reality. Although it wasn't like people could see her, her fellow exam attendees would know she was naked, and there were likely going to be a slew of gross comments about her body. Do people dress screwdrivers? Wrenches? Nobody bats an eye when they don't have clothes? Was what All for One had told her to calm her down. You are just like one of those. A tool I can perfectly use. There is no reason to feel a sense of shame or fear. Her master's voice had always calmed her down before a mission before. But this time he hadn't spoken to her before she attended the exam. He had in fact gone into deep hiding in preparation for Toru to deal with being a normal student. All for One had said under no circumstances could they be seen together anymore. And thus Toru didn't have her master to calm her down before the exam. I can do this. I can do this. She tried to remind herself to calm down. She tried so hard to steady her breathing as the thoughts about her body being exposed clouded her mind again and again. I will make everyone proud of me. She was trembling as she gazed upon the hero school. Thank God this looks normal to passerbyers. Any student would have anxiety before a hero exam. She tried to tell herself this was further helping her cover. She got dizzy though. The big school started spinning for the first time in her mission. Toru waved her hands frantically as she realized she was getting closer and closer to the ground, her anxiety clearly getting the slight better of her. Beezing. She heard a weird mechanical sound and something pulled at the cuff of her shirt, pulling her up. She did not fall, and the world stopped spinning, breaking her free from her momentary panic. The sound of someone running forward made her move her head. Looked like you were going to fall there. But I got project number 12 to rescue you. A girl with bright pink hair grinned widely. Project number 12, as the schoolgirl had called it, looked like a big giant mechanical bug with U-shaped hands instead of talons. It perched on the girl's shoulder. She caressed the large yellow beetle's fake chin. Toru stared at her for a moment, trying to get a basic analysis of the person who stood in front of her. Another person interacting with her seemed to wake her up from her cloud of anxiety and let her slip back into her mask of bubbly schoolgirl like it was another costume. Project number 12? She asked. The bubbly pink-haired girl nodded, patting the mechanical beetle again. This baby hero. I got 11 more babies at home. Thus, he's project number 12. Despite the girl's classic go-get-'em attitude associated with heroes, she looked a lot different than the other girls Toru had seen walking by. For one, she didn't wear a skirt like most of the Japanese school uniforms required. She wore pants. She had a belt at her hip with various tools, and her jacket was tied behind her neck instead of being worn like she didn't care how cold it was. Perhaps she's more action-based and is willing to get down and dirty in a fight. Maybe that's the type of hero she's trying to be, Toru thought in her mind. There were over 300 exam attendees. It was likely that Toru would never see this girl again because she wouldn't pass. UA had a remarkably small acceptance rate. But still, because this girl had rushed to her rescue, Toru decided to catalog her in her mind because she might very well pass. You okay now? The girl asked again. I saw you trembling a bit. But it's all right. Everyone gets performance anxiety sometimes. She gave a big thumbs up. Toru decided to play along that it was just test anxiety. It's just such a huge test, you know? It's so nerve-wracking. I don't know how anyone can't have their stomachs turning over. You know? She shook her arms frantically as if to illustrate her topic. The pink-haired girl just smiled politely as she listened, nodding in equal vigor as Toru's arm waving. She gave her mechanical bug a few more pets and steam started to expel from its wings. The girl immediately stopped listening when she started smelling the steam and grabbed her bug and shook it. No, baby. Don't break. It wasn't that much weight pulling up a human. The girl screamed as her creation seemed to be fizzling away. Baby 12, I'll fix you. We can still fix you. As if at lightning speeds, the girl pulled out duct tape from her pocket as if to bandage the poor bug. It was clear this had happened many times to Toru because of how quickly the girl went to work. Toru tilted her head to the side. Do people's mechanical familiars break? Should I slowly back away and get going as she performs her operation? The pink-haired girl, who was now kneeling on the ground with the bug creature in her lap as if performing surgery, shoulders slumped. No more could be done for the sad bug. Its life had been extinguished in duct tape. She seemed to have forgotten about Toru's existence. Toru took a small step backwards to make a break for it. Are all wannabe heroes so eccentric? The impression the pink-haired girl had given when she was being helpful was completely different from the impression she was giving now. She must have accidentally stepped on a small stick, because there was a cracking sound and the noise of her escape was evident. The pink-haired girl's head wiped up, remembering Toru existed. She discarded her now-dead creation and moved forward to look at Toru more closely. Her head moved closer and closer, and Toru pulled back, worried the girl would knock her forehead into her own. Hey, I didn't notice before, but you're invisible. The girl grabbed Toru's shoulder so she couldn't get away. How did you not notice before? Toru found herself wondering. The sneaking suspicion that the girl had approached her not out of a rescue attempt but testing her creation on her was starting to enter her mind. Toru had never been that close to a girl, and carefully moved the pink-haired girl's hands off her shoulders, brushing them off. Yes, that's my quirk. And yours? She said simply. Zoom. I can zoom my vision towards things up to 5 kilometers away, the girl stated proudly. Upon inspection, the girl did have a weird dot in both eyes. They're moving like she's zooming now. Is she trying to zoom into my invisibility and inspect it? This girl was curious and very observant. And observant and curious ones were the worst match for Toru's infiltration. Her quirk doesn't sound the most combat-oriented though. She probably won't pass the exam. She shook her head to herself. There wasn't a need to even spare a thought for this girl. If she wouldn't pass, then she wasn't part of her mission and she'd never encounter her again. Even if this girl was observant and clearly incredibly intelligent, she wasn't a threat if she wasn't going to pass and was a waste of Toru's brain power. Well, I'm sure you'll do fine. Invisibility quirks are very helpful to heroes. Do you specialize in costume design? Creations? Retail? The girl pat Toru's shoulders again, still clearly talking to her, probably trying to ease Toru's test anxiety. But what does that have to do with the exam? Toru found herself thinking anyway. Information. Toru found herself answering. That made sense for an invisibility quirk. The girl's eyes seemed to zoom. Very interesting. She smiled. She shook Toru at her shoulders. Well, I've never made a baby with the power of invisibility. I hope we get to be in the same class. We do. Will you let me examine your body? Toru's mind did a double take at that. She flushed as the girl grabbed her hand and examined it with hers as if to figure out if they had the same number of fingers. She immediately pulled away. Isn't that a little too forward to ask on a first meeting? I'm not. I am a shy girl even though I'm invisible. Toru responded loudly. The pink-haired girl still smiled as if none of Toru's words sunk in. So we gotta become friends first? Rightio. My name is Mei Hatsume. And yours? Toru Hagakure. Toru replied. Mei instantly shook her hand again. I know you'll pass. Best of luck. And with that, since the crowd was dissipating because they had talked so long, she waved goodbye and left. If Toru had paid attention, she would have realized that Mei ran off in a different direction, the support exam. I wonder if that girl can be a hero. Well, probably not. She decided to put the strange girl out of mind. She continued walking, the shock bringing back her confidence. The first portion of the exam was, of course, the written exam. This was the easy part to Toru. She was seated in a classroom after picking up her ID for the test. After being handed a paper with many questions, a police officer overseeing the room of students told everyone to start. Although I know all the answers, I should try to aim for an average score. I think I need above an 80% to pass on this one. That was the information she was given. I should try to aim for a 92 then. A 90 just in case the pass rate is higher, and a little higher than that because since I'm invisible they know I'll have to rely on intelligence over physical strength. It wasn't too high like genius level. It was just right to aim for. She made sure to do her test quickly and then self-score to ensure she got the score she was aiming for. She then waited until she was exactly in the middle of people who had finished their work to turn in her exam. Not the first or the last. And with that she had done the first portion and headed to the practical. It was a large lecture hall that the practical exam's description was held in. Toru found a seat somewhere in the middle of the lecture hall and watched as the hero she knew as Present Mike stood in front of her in front of a large screen and podium. I don't recognize anyone from my middle school here. Toru noted. Was she the only student that had tried out for UA? Perhaps all for one had predicted that and chosen that exact middle school for her because there were no aspiring heroes there. After all, if someone else from her class made it to UA, there was an off chance they might let it slip that Toru had only attended their school for a year and was a transfer student from another school. And if those records were ever looked up, there was a chance that the fact that they were all forgeries would be discovered. The lights turned on and Present Mike began the orientation. For all you examinee listeners tuning in, welcome to my show today, he said as if performing. Everybody say hey. Toru looked around, opting to follow the crowd. There was only silence. Everybody seems as not interested in this as I am. What a refined response. Present Mike didn't seem to be offended. I'll get to what you're actually interested in then, and quickly present the rundown of the practical exam. He posed again. Are you ready? Yeah. Nobody responded again. The hero Present Mike seemed to be eccentric, egotistical, and prone to flamboyance in the records I researched. He was observant, though mostly playing the part of a fool to keep people in a good mood though from what I researched. As long as I don't necessarily make problems for him, I should have a fine time dealing with him. Toru thought to herself. It was relatively easy to analyze Present Mike because he put his own information out there on the radio every week to easily be analyzed by villains. It showed an abundance of pride and overconfidence that him saying exactly how his quirk worked in a public radio show wouldn't ever be used against him. As it says in the application requirements, you listeners will be conducting 10-minute mock urban battles after this. Present Mike finally started explaining. 10 minutes? They shortened the time down from previous examinees, Toru realized. UA was prone to changing something about their exams so that previous students couldn't help newbie heroes cheat. But she didn't particularly like how she had less time. You can bring whatever you want with you. After this presentation you'll head to your specified battle center designated on your ID card. Present Mike explained. Toru glanced down at her ID card. She was in Center F. If you can bring anything you want with you, though Mei should have an easy time passing this exam. She did say that her bug was Project 12, so she must have other weapons. She found herself briefly thinking about the strange pink-haired girl, wondering what center Mei was placed in. 3 different types of faux villains are stationed in each battle center. You earn points for each of them based on their level of difficulty. Present Mike stated. 3 different robots came onto screen, each with their point total. Your goal, dear listeners, is to use your quirks to gain points and immobilize the villains. Present Mike said. Toru's fist tightened on her ID, having slight annoyance. She couldn't help but feel angry on behalf of all the villains who had been shunned by society because they couldn't pass a standardized test. The deck's really stacked against people with useful quirks that aren't combat-oriented, huh? Heroes really do only care about power, and if you can beat something up, good. UA wanted flashy things, not useful things. That was clear. Attacking other examinees and any other unheroic acts are strictly prohibited, Present Mike declared. I wasn't planning to attack someone anyway, but he's basically saying the early bird gets the worm, huh? Toru thought. A boy with glasses raised his hand, interrupting the lecture. May I ask a question? Present Mike gave his approval. On the printout there is 4 types of villains. If that is a misprint, then UA, one of the most prominent schools in Japan, should be ashamed of the foolish mistake. We examinees are here in this place because we wish to be molded into exemplary heroes. The boy with glasses loudly and passionately spoke. But this kinda guy. Toru rubbed her head. Mr. Nitpicker she liked to call him, trying to find flaws in everything to seem more intelligent. The printout did have 4 kinds of robots and only 3 had been discussed, but the 4th was clearly to be used for rescue points. Toru's information said that there was some way for quirks that were non-combat oriented to pass the exam, like healing-based quirks. Kurogiri had stated that UA usually liked to have a big dangerous obstacle in their exams that other students could rescue people in trouble from. Even if she didn't have that information though, it seemed to be common sense that UA wouldn't have printed out a whole other drawing for no reason and then listed it for 0 points. That guy's gotta worry less on looking intelligent and more on being intelligent. She thought to herself. The man was still speaking and pointed behind him. Moreover, you over there with the curly hair. You've been muttering this whole time. It's distracting. If you're here on a pleasure trip, you should leave immediately. He seemed genuinely angry. Toru tried to crane her neck to see this problem student as chaos seemed to unfold. She couldn't spot him. Now I wish I had a zoom quirk. She joked to herself. Still, it seemed like Mr. Nitpicker was more of a distraction than a student who was muttering only loud enough for the students around him to hear him. She certainly hadn't heard anything. I wish I knew his face though. A student that apparently distracting could be easy to exploit as a distraction for the robots as I sneak up on them. All she needed was a meat shield to push into the way. Or alternatively, I could continuously rescue a bad student. Okay. Examinee number 7111. Thanks for the great message. Present Mike tried to quiet Mr. Nitpicker down. The 4th type of villain is worth 0 points. That guy's an obstacle basically. There's one of him in every exam area, a guy who will go crazy in narrow spaces. It's not impossible to defeat, but there's no reason to defeat it either. I recommend that you listeners try to avoid it. Basically, he's telling us to not pay too much attention to it even though he really is important in the exam. Is anyone going to fall for the whole lie that it isn't important? Toru looked around. Everyone seemed to be hanging on to Mick's words, believing every second of it. I forgot normal high schoolers were gullible idiots. That's all from me. Finally, I'll give you listeners a present, our school motto. The hero Napoleon Bonaparte once said, "A true hero is someone who overcomes life's misfortunes." Go beyond, plus ultra. Present Mike posed. And your school seems to be doing great at making many students have misfortune. Toru glared, still not over the very bias towards combat quirks test. She hated the hero's saying of plus ultra. And with that, Present Mike dismissed them and she was off to Area F. About 50 students gathered outside the double doors of Area F. The examinees seemed to be given a little time to get ready before the actual exam began. Immediately Toru looked around for interesting faces in the group. Someone who might be easily exploited or used as a good distraction. There were a few people's faces that stuck out to her. A girl with a flower growing out of her head. An entirely pink girl with horns, a very short boy with something looking like grapes growing out of his head, and a man with a bird head. Basically a lot of weird head people. Considering she didn't have a visible head, she briefly wondered if all the weird-headed people had been grouped together. But 1 or 2 people had normal faces, so it must have just been a coincidence. Some people were chatting as if to calm their nerves. The entirely pink girl with horns growing out of her head was one of those people chatting everyone up. Hey, my name's Mina Ishido. It's nice to meet you. She very cheerily went up to as many people as she could and shook their hands. Another bubbly girl, should I imitate her or try to be more friendly than her? Toru wondered. Bubbly was supposed to be her personality. She decided, though there was no law in normal society, that 2 girls couldn't both be friendly. I'm Toru Hagakure. Toru greeted cheerily, happily shaking Mina's hand. You can probably tell what my quirk is? She joked. Mina giggled. I like you. You're fun. My quirk isn't nearly as obvious. I wish it had something to do with my skin or horns. Like, can you imagine if I had the power to change people's skin colors? I'd make them all disco balls. Or if I could grow big and buff and ram people with my horns. That would be cool. Toru nodded. That would be super neat. Or you could grow into a big monster with monster horns. I'd bet you'd slay those robots in a matter of minutes with a quirk like that. Toru said excitedly. Mina giggled. God, I wish I could be a big huge monster. She agreed. Shoo. Some people are trying to psyche themselves up. Another examinee scolded. Killjoy, Mina said under her breath, sticking her hands in her pockets. Nobody else seemed to be incredibly disrupted by the two girls' chatter. The examinee is right that it's time to prepare though. Toru sighed. She wished she didn't have to do this in a place with so many people and there was a little bit more privacy to get invisible. She tried to not pay much attention to it and take off her shoes and socks. Toru started unbuttoning her shirt but immediately stopped when she felt the unblinking gaze of another student. She looked around and then down and saw the short grape-haired kid staring at her leerily. Hot, you have to take off your clothes to use your quirk properly. He was drooling. If I happen to run into you. Toru froze immediately and shivered. That's right, out in society there are always people like this. People who took advantage of women who had to show more skin to use their quirk. And they never got more than a slap on the wrist if they assaulted anyone in hero society. It disgusted her. It frightened her. She felt the world spin again, and her stomach started hurting and becoming woozy. Mina seemed to notice and stopped talking about how excited she was to finally be a hero or how she'd look if she was a dragon. She looked at Toru's shoes on the ground and glanced at the grape-haired kid, realizing immediately what Toru had to do to prepare and froze at what the grape-haired kid said. She put a hand on Toru's shoulder to steady her. Toru stopped shivering, slip into the people-person mask. Toru. Someone else is here. Normal girls probably don't act like this. Mina leaned forward. Don't worry, people like that never become heroes. She whispered. I don't beat people up that I don't like, but he makes me want to. She was gripping Toru's shoulder tightly. Toru could feel her anger. It made Toru smile just a little bit. I guess there are other people who don't like that kind of attitude my age. She bit her lip, just try to avoid him. You didn't want to stand out in the test anyway. Just run the other direction of him. Her goal was to pass. To do average. Not to do great after all. She didn't need to be anywhere near the grape-haired kid. She nodded, thanks Mina. No problem. Mina nodded back. Girls got to stick together against creeps. The pink-haired girl might have been an aspiring hero, but she seemed nice enough. She had to mentally thank her for the moment of comfort. The doors started to open. Toru would have to undress elsewhere, it seemed. And the test began. As planned, Toru instantly darted the opposite direction as the grape kid. To save time, she removed her clothes on the run. She couldn't afford to hide them somewhere easy to access to get them back, so she had to unfortunately just leave them there. She turned her head back and forth looking for someone with a flashy quirk but not a fast-acting one that could easily be used as a distraction to stall enemies. She noticed the flower-headed person humming and growing a huge Venus flytrap out of their head. It seemed to fully get the robot's attention. Bingo, she thought to herself. She ran as fast as she could and launched herself onto the robot's legs. It turned its head from the flower-based quirk user for a second, looking for what kind of creature had infiltrated it. Aim for the 2-point ones. You don't need to be flashy. Toru reminded herself. She no longer had to be Toru. She was a tool to infiltrate the hero society. Its big red sensor spun around looking for her, but it could not see her. She reached forward towards where she had researched its hatch with its motherboard was present. She didn't have any tools on her and she grabbed it with her fingers, pulling as hard as she could. But her fingernail broke apart a bit, bleeding. The robot lifted up its talons to strike at her, hearing her scream. It couldn't see or feel her blood, but it could hear. She reached into the wiring and pulled as hard as she could. And it stopped moving. Where? Wait, what happened? The flower quirk user asked, not seeing anything of who had infiltrated the robot. Toru smiled and hopped off. Perfect. I can do this. I just need to defeat 20 more of that type. Based on the information I gathered beforehand, there should be 100 robots of each type, besides the fourth one in each area. And then I can make up the difference in rescue points if I'm aiming for an average score of 50. Using whatever person she could as a distraction, she continued her technique of jumping onto the robot and destroying their panels as quick as she could. Learning from her first mistake, she was able to pick up a small sharp rock to pry open the compartment. Sometimes people would notice the floating rock, but a lot of the kids seemed to be so nervous by their own test that they didn't pay it any mind. Once she had completed defeating 15 robots at the expense of other kids who were about to defeat them, she went about looking for people who needed help. All the other robots have been defeated. I just keep running into robot corpses, she said loudly, kicking at one. Nobody else knew about the rescue points after all, and that she was specifically looking for people in trouble. She saw the little grape kid screaming but opted not to help him. A robot seemed to be covered in sticky grape balls, unable to move, while another robot was hitting at him repeatedly. You snooze, you lose? A voice responded to Toru that was rather higher pitch. She turned her head and saw the person with the bird head struggling. Another shadow bird-like creature was coming out of his stomach and seemed to be eviscerating robot after robot with its talons. Dark shadow, that's enough, we should go to another area. The person with the bird head's voice was much deeper. Do you need any help? Toru asked, casually walking over. I think I saw a first aid kit near the entrance. Are you in any pain? She wasn't sure exactly what was happening here, but it looked like he didn't have the finest control over his quirk. The bird-headed man looked confused as he heard a voice talk to him, but he saw nothing. I am fine, he reassured. Dark shadow is simply a monster that lives inside of me. I would suggest steering clear of the darkness, though, if you do not wish to be hurt. What he said sounded edgy. Hey buddy, don't just go around telling random disembodied voices about me. And I'm a great asset to this team, thank you very much. Dark shadow scolded. Got it? Toru saluted. So I should follow this guy and make sure no other students get hit by the wreckage he's creating and pull them away. I should be able to get my rescue points that way. It looked like she had 5 minutes or so left. She was doing a little better than most students because she wasn't frantically running around looking for points or in a panic from her first battle. Not only that, but she had calculated the number of robots she needed to defeat ahead of time. The bird-headed man seemed to be doing pretty well for himself. But that was likely because Dark Shadow, as he called it, delighted in violence. There seemed to be no anxiety from his side. Although it is odd that he's going to the shadow of buildings to attack the robots. Toru noted. Is his quirk powered by darkness? Or is it because he's trying to avoid other students and other students are trying to go into higher vision areas? If they couldn't see, they couldn't attack after all. She made a mental note of his quirk. Bird-headed man seemed very likely to make it in as a UA student if he had passed his written exam. He seemed tough. And if he was keeping to the shadows because he required darkness for his quirk, well, that's something for me to exploit later on. After all, I can generate light with my body. It was easily exploitable. And she liked things like that. She made sure to follow him as he continued to destroy robot after robot. A man with a box for a head seemed distracted as Dark Shadow destroyed another. He didn't realize he was right under the robot as the bird-headed man attacked. Dark Shadow, stop. The bird-headed man yelled frantically, realizing he had screwed up and the robot teetered about to collapse on box-headed boy. It was too late though. Dark Shadow had already done the important damage as the robot's legs started teetering. The box-headed man didn't seem to realize he was about to be crushed too and kept trying to attack the robot's belly. The bird-headed man looked panicked, but luckily Toru had this. She ran forward and pushed the student out of the way of the wreckage. I got you. It's lucky I was in the area. The robot collapsed just as they had escaped. She hated touching anyone with her naked body. But to get those rescue points it was necessary. She willed the vomit down. Thanks? Whoever you are? The student looked confused as he looked around for the disembodied voice. Toru realized. How are the scorers going to realize I defeated all those robots and saved students? When I'm quiet, someone with a telekinesis-based quirk can easily take the credit. I'm an invisible girl. Toru replied proudly. Toru Hagakure. She hoped the people watching the footage would take note. Thanks, sir. But I'd suggest focusing on your own test. The box-headed student smiled and waved and ran off to continue his test. The birdman's Dark Shadow pulled himself down to the ground as he tried to steady his breathing. I thought I told you to steer clear and avoid the darkness. He scolded. You did. But I was coincidentally in this area too and didn't know if anyone else had heard you. I didn't want anyone else getting hurt, so I ran over and thought to help. The bird-headed man scoffed. Focus on your own exam. I'm not so kind as to give you my points because you saved me from falling further into the darkness because of accidentally injuring a student, he said very emo. But you considered it? Toru. Sounds a little tsundere to me. But I'll be fine, don't worry. She reassured him. The bird-headed man looked skeptical as Toru continued to, coincidentally, help anyone trapped in the bird-headed man's path. Eventually a giant robot appeared and everyone ran. Toru noticed Mina helping people who had fallen down as she slided on the ground on what could almost be considered a sort of slime. The siren blared just as she got back to the entrance, ending the exam. Outside, faculty staff members seemed to be surveying people's injuries and doing first aid. Lots of people's facial expressions looked downcast, either realizing they had failed or scared from their first experience of battle. Toru was confident she had gotten an average score as she had intended to do. Could I perhaps have a spare change of clothes? Toru asked one of the people on the first aid team. The person looked shocked that they were being spoken to by nothing. Oh yeah. Sure? Where are you? I'm invisible. I'm right here. Toru wagged her finger, but the first aid person still couldn't pinpoint her. Mina seemed to notice the commotion. She had quite a bit of scratches on her but walked over. Do you just ignore someone because of their quirk? She's right in front of you, obviously. Give her some clothes. She's cold. The staff member looked flustered and handed Mina a spare set of clothes, who handed it to Toru. Toru couldn't help but notice the grape-headed kid was staring over at them, despite the fact that he was covered in blood and was heavily injured. Mina shielded her for a moment. Don't worry about him. I did save him from getting eaten by a robot, but there's no way he passed. He got heavily beaten up and his attitude isn't that of a hero. We'll never have to see him again. Mina reassured. Toru. Well, I hope you passed. You defeated some robots, right? I mean, I didn't see, but I probably passed. I mean, I was nervous and all, but I'm confident I made it. Unless I failed the written exam, that is. Those questions were all so hard. Toru finished slipping on her new outfit. They were. I know. I got 'em. I forgot to count 10? 15 robots? I think I'm at 30 points. I hope that's enough to pass. Toru said it loud enough that she hoped any staff member listening could aid her story if there was a problem proving she defeated any of them. Hopefully that's enough. I'm a little worried though, Toru. I've heard you need at least 45 points to pass. Mina frowned, linking arms with Toru. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Toru fake groaned knowing she had that amount of points in rescue points. I hope I see you again, Mina. Mina nodded. Me too. I'm gonna go find my friend Kirishima now and see how he did. It would suck if only one person from my school got in. She enthusiastically ran off. Toru looked around hoping the creepy grape head was no longer looking at her. She noticed the man with a bird head was though. You will pass. He told her, walking up to her. He smirked, which was hard with the beak. You acted like a hero protecting people from my clumsiness. It seems I need to work on steering clear from others. He looked sad for a moment. It would be a great foul if the school didn't acknowledge that. And with that the man with a bird head waved and walked off towards the main offices. Toru suspected he was going to talk to the school about giving her some of his points, despite how he had insisted he wouldn't. A stab of guilt hit Toru knowing she was using him despite his good heart. Tools don't need guilt. She reminded herself and walked off. She got the results in the mail in her new house address that the League of Villains had set up for her. The nervousness had started to set in during the week. I know I passed. But I don't trust heroes to know that. What if they give my accomplishments to someone else? Toru found herself worrying. Was there anyone with any sort of levitation/telekinesis quirks she should have been avoiding in her group? She hadn't gathered enough information. She opened the envelope nervously. There was a half-cylinder holographic generator in it that she threw the ground to generate an image. A mouse in a chair sat in the movie. Toru Hagakure, Quirk Invisibility. I am Principal Nizu and I would like to congratulate you on being accepted into UA. The mouse spoke. Toru found herself smiling. I did it. You might be wondering how you scored, or which class you'll be in. You scored pretty decently in the written exam, about average. The mouse smiled, and in the practical, well, your rescue points were pretty decent. Ah yes, everyone was scored by a merit of points based on not only the robots they destroyed but by rescue points as well. A school of heroes wouldn't be a school of heroes if people weren't rewarded for helping others, right? The mouse smiled, surprised. Toru found herself thinking. Tokoyami did come to us asking if he could share some of his points based on the damage you minimized of his to other students, but we told him that wasn't possible. Do not worry though, Tokoyami passed as well. The principal explained. As expected. Toru nodded. The problem is of course your points based on defeating robots. Unfortunately, our cameras weren't able to catch you at all even with our various sensors. I examined the footage personally and based on movements of the ground slightly and the robots we were only able to pinpoint you defeating about 5 robots. Although one of our staff members said that you could have defeated 10 or 15 because he overheard you talking. It's quite a problem we need to figure out on how to be able to properly score people with invisibility-based quirks. For that reason I'm not able to give you a consistent score and I just am going to pass you on default. For exposing a flaw in UA's system for us. Thank you. Toru sighed. So someone somewhere did get the credit for some of the robots I defeated, and she probably didn't get a full point number. Either way, you were impressive sacrificing your points in the test to help other students. So you pass. You'll be in class at... Congratulations, Toru. Excited to have you. Toru smiled, and as quick as she could she ran to the computer to send the League of Villains a message. I'm in was all she sent. Tomorrow would be the start of her mission. The hard part was done. She had succeeded in infiltration. There was no mother to wish Toru off for a good first day of school. She got ready in silence in her new empty house, packing her book bag with everything she would need for a normal first day of school. It was quiet. I wonder what other kids with parents experience on their first day of school. Toru wondered. Do their moms give them a kiss on the cheek and wish them the best of luck? I think I read that in a book. She rubbed her cheek briefly. Her master, all for one, would never do something like that. She did feel a rush of gratitude that he had prepared a house for her and gotten all the official paperwork in order to make it look like she had owned the house for a while, and that was her primary place of residency. It was a nice house too, looked perfectly normal, and her fake room looked like everything a teenage girl might have with nice plush pillows and some dolls. I'm not planning to have anyone over, but in case anyone visits it'll look normal enough. Toru reminded herself. I'll be back. She told her empty house and left for her first day of infiltration work. Just be normal and form bonds and make friends. That was her mission for the first day. Observe the enemy heroes and just be normal. She found the classroom with ease, no trembling in her arms at all. I wonder who my classmates will be. There should be 19 others I have to observe, right? Her mind briefly jumped to Ishido and Hatsume. Likely both of them had passed the exams. She wondered if they'd be placed in Class A or B. As she slid open the giant door surveying the room before she slipped into her desk, she noticed that she already recognized a few people. The pink girl with horns named Mina had in fact passed, but Hatsume was nowhere to be seen. Oh, Toru. Mina waved her over. I'm so happy you passed. It's good to know another girl here. She gave Toru a thumbs up. Toru smiled back. Yeah. The entrance exam was tough, but I'm happy I succeeded. All the robots coming at me had me go like W. She frantically waved her arms and pantomimed her story. Mina politely nodded. Yeah. I was lucky we were fighting robots instead of like animals or something since my quirk is acid. She nervously rubbed the back of her head. A girl sitting behind Mina poked her head out towards them. Are you two my new classmates? She asked. Her eyes were big and blank. Toru decided she looked a little frog-like. Yeah. The name's Toru Hagakure. As you can see I'm invisible. Toru greeted. Mina Ishido. I can shoot acid. Cool, isn't it? Mina smiled. That sounds very useful. The girl nodded. My name's Azui. Tsuyu. Please call me Tsuyu. I can pretty much do everything a frog can do, so I'm very mobile. Toru happily shook her hand. A mobility-based quirk, huh? She eyes the girl's legs for a moment. They looked strong and agile. Her hands also seemed to have the fingertips wider than a normal person's, as if she could crouch on the ground and leap. Her skin looked pretty moist and soft too. It looked like the rubbery texture of a frog. And the way the girl's tongue moved as she talked made it clear that it was a far larger tongue than the normal person's. She knew Tsuyu couldn't see her narrowing her eyes as she heavily observed her. It was part of her mission after all to gather intel on who could be obstacles to all for one's mission. And part of that was observing the intelligence and quirks of her opponents. Tsuyu seemed powerful and she mentally cataloged that information for herself in the future. Only a dummy took notes that could be found on one's enemies, so she made sure to memorize everything that seemed to gauge Tsuyu's power. "Is your seat over here, Toru?" Tsuyu asked, looking at the clock. No, it isn't." Toru hastily shook her head. "Sorry. I was just greeting Mina. Don't want to get in trouble in the first day." Toru fake slapped her cheeks. "Talk to you two later, new classmates. I'm sure this year is going to be fun." "Of course it is. It seems like Class A has some amazing girls. I'm sure we'll form some great camaraderie between us." Mina gave a thumbs up. "And hey, I can vouch for at least one of the boys." She pointed over at a spiky red head. "That's one of my old schoolmates, Kirishima." "Whoa, no way. You actually made it into the same class as one of your middle school friends?" Toru brought her face closer to Mina, so Mina could feel her excitement. "How lucky is that? That does seem rather rare. All my hero-aiming middle school friends tried for different schools." "So you mentioned." Mina waved her hand. "Come on, it doesn't seem that rare. I'm sure other people here are old classmates." Toru briefly looked around. Nobody seemed to look like old friends and everyone seemed to be trying to get newly acquainted with one another. She did notice Tokoyami though, and to her horror, the grape-headed kid. Mina grimaced, noticing Toru's arms fly to her face in a gasp at seeing Mineta. "I know. I'm surprised too. Maybe he has an amazingly powerful quirk that let him get in? Just try to ignore him," she advised. "HM?" Tsuyu tilted her head. "The grape-headed kid." Mina pointed. "He was in Toru's and my exam group. He was kinda creepy. Well, I'm willing to give anyone a chance. Maybe he just has limited social skills? I've been called creepy before too." Tsuyu frowned. Toru frowned to herself. Of course heroes wouldn't take making women uncomfortable seriously. He's not that kinda creepy. He's more like, She hit her hand lightly to herself. "A serial ogler." "Oh." Tsuyu immediately dropped her defense. She was quiet for a moment. At a loss for words, she seemed to be trying to think. Toru decided to make her quick escape to find her desk at that moment. She didn't really want to go into why the grape-headed kid made her uncomfortable. Tokoyami tried to get up for a moment, perhaps to greet her and congratulate her on also getting into that same class. But Toru could tell from his movements that he lost his courage midway and sat back down. Not that he was aware she was watching him. Her desk was in the right corner in front of a spiky blonde-haired dude and next to a guy with a ninja mask who looked rather large. He seemed to have 6 large arms. A power-type quirk? He looks powerful. Toru decided perhaps not to interact as quickly with him. She didn't want someone so powerful to get angry. The person she was in front of was wearing a cocky grin and had his feet on the table. "Well, he's not too large, so maybe I should introduce myself. I do sit in front of him and all. Maybe he's friendly," she decided. As she put her books down, she turned around to speak to him. Almost immediately, a tall man with glasses stood up from his desk. Toru's back prickled for a second as she realized he was looking over there, and she snapped her body back towards the front to be a good student. He didn't seem to notice though, and he waved his arm. "Please remove your foot from the desk." The spiky-haired boy behind Toru, who the glasses guy was speaking to, grinned wider. "Oh yeah? You gonna make me, for eyes?" As if to further his point, he leaned back. He's one of those sorts of people who like making trouble. Maybe she had dodged a bullet not introducing herself to the person she was in front of. But he was the person she'd be in front of for the whole year. Immediately at that, the glasses guy ran across the room. Toru saw steam erupting from his pants for a second. "I remember. This is the know-it-all who disrupted the entrance exam asking questions." Toru realized. He was closer now, and Toru crossed her hands and tried to act perfectly still as to not get involved. "Remove your foot from the desk," he repeated again. He then took a deep breath and started a lecture. "Such an action is not befitting a student of UA. Not only that, but it is insulting to those who have come before us and sat at these desks in UA. Not only that, but you're insulting the craftsman who made that desk dash. Oh gods. So this is what being in a course with heroes is like. Toru took a deep breath. This was going to be a long year. And the yelling was so loud she could barely concentrate. Like I care. What middle school are you even from? Side character. The spiky-haired kid didn't even seem fazed by the lecture. Toru tried not to move her head too much as to not spark the people arguing's attention. Act invisible. Don't make enemies on the first day. She told herself, sweating to herself. She didn't expect a fight between heroes right behind her. She noticed as her head was frozen that the door at the side had opened. Another student had walked in and he was staring at the fight and sweating. That's the right reaction, kid. Just sneak away. Toru made eye contact although he didn't notice. As she made eye contact she frowned. The curly hair reminded her of something. The entrance exam again. Oh, he's the guy glasses told to keep quiet in public. No wonder he looks like a deer in headlights. Class 1A seemed to already have so much drama. Toru somewhat heard what the glasses kid was saying as she tried not to get involved. His name was Tenya Ida and he came from a very elite middle school. Likely he was from one of those hero-based families. Smoke came briefly from his legs, and Ida is the family of heroes with engine legs. She knew of them. A tough hero had appeared. Would Ida be the greatest obstacle in class for her? Ida seemed to stop yelling as he finally noticed the curly-haired student in the doorway. He walked away from right behind Toru and started chatting with him about the entrance exam. Toru breathed a sigh of relief that he was now gone. She immediately pulled out a pencil and sheet of paper to look like a good student who was prepared. Is the spiky-haired guy going to yell at me? I am sitting in front of him. Should she introduce herself quickly? To try to avoid his future wrath. Hi, I'm the person who will be sitting in front of you. That's what she wanted to say. But as she turned around she saw him glaring. Not at her, but at the curly-haired student. It was like he knew him. He didn't seem to notice her at all. She was invisible to him. And she wondered how long she would be before he noticed someone was sitting in front of him. The curly-haired kid was now talking to a girl who had just come in with brown hair and friendly eyes. She seemed to ask something. I wonder what our homeroom teacher will be like? And with that the two of them froze. They seemed to be looking at something on the ground outside the room. The teacher, I assume. But why is he on the ground? Toru watched as someone stood up in a sleeping bag. Everyone in the class was silent and seemed stunned. It took a moment, but the man in the sleeping bag walked in front of the students. He unzipped his sleeping bag. Once I came about, it took 8 seconds for you to quiet down. Time is a precious resource. You all aren't very rational, are you? He lectured. The man looked haggard and had a large scarf on. Toru recognized him from pictures her master had told her to research of pro-heroes. This man had the least pictures yet was labeled dangerous. Eraserhead. He can erase quirks, I believe. I don't know the specifics because he's not one of those camera-loving heroes. But he's very dangerous. Toru frowned. Of course their homeroom teacher would be tough, but she hadn't been expecting this tough. Obviously the League of Villains wouldn't have much information on UA since she was the first one who had infiltrated it. But still this was unexpected. I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa. Pleased to meet you, he introduced. Now go change into your gym clothes and meet me in the field. Quickly, he warned. All the students got up out of their desk. They knew haste was necessary. All of the students ran out to the field. Toru heard the brown-haired girl ask about the entrance ceremony and the teacher responded that it wasn't important. Are we practicing in the field before learning about the curriculum? Toru wondered. We'll be having a test of quirks? Aizawa instantly explained. I want to see what all of you can do. Some people looked excited, some nervous, like the curly-haired boy. UA is known for its freestyle education system. That includes the teachers as well. We aren't standardized. Aizawa explained. He then started a long-winded explanation. Softball throwing, the standing long jump, 50-meter dash, endurance running, grip strength, side-to-side step, upper body training, seated toe touch. You all did those in middle school, correct? It was standard, no quirks allowed gym class. Toru nodded to herself. She had indeed done those sorts of things in her year of middle school that all for one had required to get her used to interacting with others. They seemed boring, purposeless. Just supposed to be fun and nothing else. She hadn't seen the point. Kids whose purpose wasn't to be tools were so weird. The country still insists on prohibiting the use of quirks when calculating the averages of those records. It's not rational. The Department of Education is just procrastinating. The teacher turned to the spiky-haired kid who was at the front of the pack, not looking nearly as scared as the rest. Bakugo, how far could you throw in middle school? 67 meters. Bakugo responded. Great, now try with your quirk. Do whatever you need. Just don't leave the circle. Aizawa handed Bakugo a ball and gestured to a circle that Bakugo was standing in. Bakugo smiled, excitedly. He immediately swirled his arm around and threw. A giant explosion shot the baseball forward, propelling it. Die! He screamed. Toru stared. An explosion quirk? Maybe the guy I'm sitting in front of is tougher than I thought. He threw far. And his personality, maybe he wasn't just cocky. He seemed incredibly unsettling. And this is the kind of heroes the country wants? Toru smiled to herself in horror. They should have held a personality test instead of a giant robot battle. This is messed up. Not just the grape-haired kid now. 2 people in her class were messed up. Out of the 18 that passed the exam and the 2 allowed into the class based on recommendation. And Toru hadn't met that many people. What if 50% of these heroes are just assholes? No wonder Master wants to get rid of them. She had never been so on the side of villainy as she stared at Bakugo and Mineta's faces. 705 meters. It's important to know your limits. That's the first rational step to figuring out what kind of hero you want to be. Aizawa wasn't smiling as he showed the panel. Whoa, awesome! The red-haired guy, Kirishima, yelled. Other students seemed to be equally showering Bakugo in praise and swooning over the coolness. Did nobody hear him yell die? Why are they praising this guy right and left? Toru wondered but joined in so she wouldn't look weird. That's amazing, she shook her hands in excitement. Awesome, you say? Aizawa didn't seem to be happy at the praise. Briefly Toru had some hopes in a pro-hero calling out the weird die comment. Her hopes were immediately dashed. You're hoping to be pro-heroes after 3 years and you think it will be all fun and games? He sounded offended. He's talking to us like we're a bunch of kids. Shigaraki's kinda right that heroes just want someone to push down and exploit. Right? The one with the lowest score across all 8 events will be judged to be hopeless and will be expelled. He said the words so coldly as he looked down at the class. Toru cracked a smile in horror. It was a smile out of sheer nervousness. She looked at her hands and ran through the events they'd practice again. I'm the only one with a quirk that can't expand my physical capabilities in some ways probably. She hadn't been given permission to publicly use her light bending. She could only be invisible. The normal day-to-day her, well, it was what they got here. And an invisible quirk wasn't underpowered. It was useful for intelligence and espionage. Heroes would rationally need it if they were smart. It wasn't a doomed notion to be an invisible hero, Toru thought. This is total discrimination on non-physical enhancement quirks. I'm going to lose. Toru was horrified. And if she lost she'd be expelled and totally fail her mission. She quickly looked around. She didn't know everyone's quirks. So maybe she had a chance. She just had to outperform the worst of them. No wonder heroes are so stupid. Tests like this favor power-based quirks, and they lose people who could be useful to them. Hero society was a mess. Toru scoffed to herself. Aizawa, someone with a quirk that erased other quirks, should have known it wasn't all about power. But yet he had still set up this test. Master wouldn't have done this. He values all different sorts of quirks. Toru felt pride and disgust at how stupid the heroes were. Well, I can't do anything about any of this. I'll beat your little game. I won't let my mission be in jeopardy. She glared directly at Aizawa coldly. Aizawa smiled, sweeping his hair back. Your fates are in our hands. Welcome to the hero course at UA. Yeah, good friggin' welcome. Toru clenched her fists together. You won't beat me. She had one advantage over the other students. And it wasn't lying and saying that nobody could prove she hadn't run the course or something. It was the fact that all the other students were essentially newborn hatchlings. They might have started training recently for hero work, but she had trained to be useful to all for one her whole life. I am a tool. A perfect tool for espionage. I've infiltrated things before. Her body was essentially the same as a quirkless individual, but she kept it in perfect shape, and she was proud of her agility and speed. Sure, her arms were a little weaker compared to a buff dude, but she had practiced for years in hand-to-hand combat in case she got caught. Hopefully that was enough to not be the top, but beat anyone who was fumbling around and also had an intelligence-based quirk. Lots of people complained about how unfair the situation was, but Aizawa would hear none of it, saying lots of heroes had to deal with unfair situations. Nobody made the point about how this sort of test favored a certain type of quirk, of course. Toru stayed silent, deciding not to make herself an outlier. The first event Aizawa had them do was the 50-meter dash. Ida and Tsuyu were paired off against one another. As predicted, Ida ran incredibly quickly thanks to the engines in his legs. Tsuyu also was able to hop to be a pretty tough competition, but of course Ida zoomed to victory. The brown-haired girl, Ochako, touched her shoes and clothes. She was paired up against a man with a tail, Ojiro. The guy with a tail seemed to use the hop to victory method as well. He beat Ochako, but she still looked pretty pleased with herself. Maybe she was better than her previous score? What did she do? Toru briefly wondered what her quirk was and mentally catalogued the poor guy whose only quirk was, "I have a buff tail." Useful in these situations, but boring. Power-based quirks were very much getting the advantage though. A French-looking guy with a belt and Mina were paired against each other. "Go Mina! Go!" Toru decided to speak. Aizawa glared at her. Toru immediately zipped it. Mina smiled and ran forward with all her speed. Her feet were slimy with acid helping her slip along. Aoyama, however, let out his quirk, a naval laser, and rocketed to the front. He then promptly fell and got up and rocketed again. He lost but barely. That was smart thinking. That sort of quirk usually isn't mobility-based. It's just a laser. Toru noted that his laser was very light-based. Perhaps a future weapon for her? If she didn't get expelled first, that is. Great job, Mina. The curly-haired kid, Midoriya, and Bakugo were paired off one another as well. Bakugo seemed to know Midoriya and not necessarily like him. He rocketed towards the front of the track and Deku was left behind. Deku breathed heavily. Toru noticed he hadn't used his quirk at all. Poor guy. I wonder if he has a quirk that doesn't make him stronger but is useful anyway too? Maybe I just have to beat that guy then. He did look nervous and kinda pathetic. Toru smiled to herself. Toru watched as other students went forward. Someone named Koda, who looked like he had a rock for a head, competed against Siro, a man with tape elbows. Koda ran as fast as he could, but also didn't use his quirk. Siro, tape elbow man, launched his tape at the finish line and rocketed forward just as predicted. Koda tried to catch his breath and Aizawa looked slightly disappointed. Think about how to use your quirk. Sometimes the answer might not seem obvious, but it pays to think outside of the box for how to apply your powers. He taught. Koda nodded. A dude with yellow hair went next, Kaminari, competing against Kirishima. No pressure, dude. Kaminari gave a thumbs up. But I'm going to beat you. Yeah, right? Kirishima grinned. In your dreams, maybe? Kirishima immediately got a head start, running and hardening his body. Each time he took a step, the ground quaked and a footmark was left behind. Kaminari, on the other hand, looked quite tired and tried to keep up with Kirishima. He was flailing and trying to keep his footing as Kirishima passed him. He narrowed his eyes, clearly having enough, and bunched his shoulders a bit, letting off a huge amount of electrical discharge. The students to the sidelines were lucky enough to be far enough away to avoid the blast, but Kirishima was not. Despite his hardening, electricity was still electricity, and it stopped Kirishima in his tracks moments before getting to the finish line. Unfortunately, Kaminari was stopped in his tracks too. He seemed to forget he was supposed to be dashing and just gave a big thumbs up, a dumb expression on his face. Aizawa sighed and rubbed his head. No sabotage allowed. This is about your quirks, not beating the enemy. In the future, Kaminari, try to move a little smarter, not harder. The lecture seemed to snap Kirishima out of his momentary paralysis, and he finally stepped over the finish line. Kaminari, on the other hand, could not get a score, and Kirishima helped him get back to the sidelines to recover his brain energy. "Ouch, man, did you have to get so competitive?" Kirishima asked, rubbing the back of his head. "I wasn't expecting you to be affected by electrical attacks." Shiro seemed shocked that Kirishima had taken any damage at all. "I just put on a hard defense. Hardness doesn't do much against electricity. It's still my skin," Kirishima pointed out, sitting next to his new friends despite the injuries caused to him. He waited for the next match. The next match was between a girl named Yaoyorozu and a girl named Jiro. Jiro had earphone jacks coming out of her ears. "Best of luck." Jiro shrugged as she stretched. Yaoyorozu smiled, and immediately a scooter popped out of her arms. "I'm sorry about this." She prepared on her scooter. Jiro gawked. Shoot, you're the recommendation student?" Yaoyorozu politely nodded. "Isn't that cheating?" Shiro asked. "It was her quirk, so no." Aizawa shook her head. Yaoyorozu scooted to victory on her scooter. Jiro tried her hardest but got a relatively normal score. All of the classmates still had their mouths agape that someone had used a scooter to do a running exercise. The man with many arms was paired off against Sato. Sato took a piece of hard candy out of his pocket. "Let us compete like men," Shoji, the man with multi-arms, requested. The timer started. Sato ran quickly, a very clear power-based quirk. However, Shoji's arm shot out, growing more and more limbs and hitting the finish line before his legs ever made it. "Does that count?" Shoji asked. Aizawa grinned. "Yeah, sure." Tokoyami was paired off against the Grape Kid, Mineta. The timer started and Tokoyami ran forward with the speed of a bird. Wait, can you slow down?" Mineta asked pathetically. "I have short stubby legs. This is unfair." He huffed and puffed and barely made it to the end. Toru grinned. "If Midoriya can beat him and I can beat him, perhaps Mineta will be expelled. He doesn't seem to have a power-based quirk either." She wondered briefly if she manipulated the light in the recording device to show a 0 for Mineta, if Aizawa would notice that someone had tampered with it. The mechanism to show results seemed to be similar to a digital clock, meaning it could be quite easy to change the reading. She quieted down her hopes. "I'm not allowed to reveal my abilities just to get rid of someone I don't like. Let that remain a fantasy. The bouquet of darkness has spoken. I win." Tokoyami looked at Mineta with sheer dislike. And finally it was Toru's turn. She was up against a guy with red and white hair. He looked bored. "You can do this, Toru. Run as fast as you can." She was just about to as the man froze his portion of the track and hers field in slippery ice, preventing her from moving forward at all. He slid to victory. She just stared. "Just my luck that I got the person with the most powerful quirk." She tried to skate to victory and run forward. Todoroki, who had now finished, dissolved the ice and she ran. She was far behind though due to the obstacle that had prevented her from moving forward. "Sorry," he said quietly. "I should have requested that I was on the other side. I put out more ice than necessary on my right side. I should have controlled it better to only my side of the racetrack. I measured when she started and when she ended for fairness' sake." Aizawa mentioned, "So no worries." Toru wanted to complain, but she knew that would draw too much attention to her. And she was currently coming in last. "Yeah, no worries. I'm sure there's something else my quirk is great at." She had sarcasm dripping off her every word, but Aizawa didn't seem to notice. "I wasn't aware an invisible quirk could help you do sit-ups and throw balls." Todoroki replied, not catching the sarcasm at all. "I should probably study up." He took every word at face value. Toru just stared blankly at him. "I should focus less on others right now." Toru decided at the second event, the gripping event. "I can observe my enemies later, but the whole mission is blown if I get expelled. And what happens to me if I fail this mission? All for one probably won't have a need for a failure. The most likely scenario would be that she would be discarded, killed. Nobody would find her invisible carcass." That made her nervous as she gripped the hand grip tool. It slipped out of her invisible hand. "Better luck next time," Mina told her. "I feel you though. I burned through mine. Acid apparently doesn't help you grip things. And you tried your best. She frowned. I am a little worried about you though. Are you good at physical activities, Toru? Average. Toru lied. Well, maybe you're not as bad as Midoriya, I think his name is? And Mineta? Mina replied hopefully. Just don't get trapped in your own heads. Tsuyu, who was watching the two girls, advised. She seemed to be doing great at these events. I don't think either of you will do the worst. But maybe not the top. Says you. I'm trying for the top. Mina grinned. That was all Toru could hope for at this point. Not being in last. Third test was the standing long jump. Quirks like Sito's tape arms, Shoji's arms, Tokoyami having another being inside of him who could aid his jumping, and the naval laser, along with big quirks like Bakugo and Todoroki's, were at an advantage here. They were easily able to jump the whole thing. Yaoyorozu, on the other hand, made a pogo stick and just jumped over all the competition thanks to her aids. She was sort of winning all the events so far. I can almost imagine her with some fake sunglasses being all cool. Toru frowned as Tsu jumped to victory along with Ida, Ojiro and Ochako, who seemed much lighter than the normal person. Mineta made a pile of balls on the ground from his hair and rocketed off of them like a bouncy ball. Darn. He did decent at that. Toru frowned to herself as she watched Midoriya fail again. It was her turn. She got into position. Imagine you're jumping from one roof to another. You've done this before. She breathed. She had practiced this one for her missions. She didn't need to rely on cheats, just her natural talent. She jumped and did a decent amount. Nothing inhumane, but more so than the average person and Midoriya had done. She smiled to herself. Nice to. You have a great pair of legs on you. Mina congratulated and slapped her back. Do you secretly have frog legs? Tsuyu asked. That was really good. Crap. Did I do too good? Did I make people suspicious? Tsuyu was looking at her like she was observing her. Aizawa was looking at her too. It seemed perhaps she had gone too far for an average high school student. I guess I lucked out. Toru pumped her arm. Lucky me. Really, it's 'cause I did that one a lot. She looked nervously at her side. Nobody else seemed to be eyeing her suspiciously. They were all too focused on their own exams. Darn. Now I probably need to bring my score down to be more average. She shouldn't win this test. She shouldn't even aim for the top. She needed to appear as an average high school student. And an average high school student with an invisibility quirk should be losing. She needed to hit somewhere at the bottom. All she needed to do was beat Mr. Nervous A. Midoriya. And maybe Mineta. That was all she needed. Unfortunately for Toru, Mineta did really good in the next event too, which was side-to-side step. He bounced to and from the balls. Ugh, maybe I should try my best too? Mina was trying her best and she got pretty fast. Not in human level, but good, fit levels. Toru tried too. It was decent. Aizawa watched her perplexed about something. Did I do okay? Crap. Is he still suspicious of me because of that super long jump? She had tried to do average. Keep up with Mina's pace and some of the more physically active students. You and Midoriya have been the only ones to not use your quirk so far. He said, annoyed. The girl with earphone jacks, Jiro, had used hers to grip the hand thing apparently. And Koda had somehow called down multiple birds to carry him across the long jump. Toru tried to put on the fakest smile she could. I'm invisible. That is my quirk. So I'm always using it. She tried not to sound too irritated. You can't make other things invisible? Like your clothes? Aizawa asked. Nope. Toru said, way too friendly. Aizawa stared at her, as if that hadn't occurred to him. Well, I suppose the sensors do sense movement and not image, so even if you were invisible it wouldn't be an instant victory. Toru nodded. Aizawa sighed and gave his student no further advice, causing Toru to frown in frustration. The fifth event was ball toss. It was another event that was set up for the other students to spectate. Perhaps that was easier on Aizawa. Since Bakugo had already gone, he was the score to beat of 705.5 meters. Toru watched as power-type quirks like Todoroki's ice, Tsuyu's tongue, Ojiro's tail, Shoji's extra arms, and Sato's sugar strength got a clear advantage again. Heroes seemed to value brute strength over intelligence. No wonder so many villains want to change society. Not that people with no intelligence necessarily instantly lost, of course. Yaoyorozu yet again seemed to make an amazing display, popping an automatic pitch machine out of her arm and smiling to herself. Hey, isn't that cheating? Kaminari chewed on his nails worriedly. It's already been determined that it's not. Jiro scolded. But man, the recommendation students sure are something else. Toru nodded to herself. The recommendation students, Todoroki and Yaoyorozu, they have to be from some sort of distinguished hero family, right? I believe the Todoroki family is linked to Endeavor. And Yaoyorozu's family is a creation-based one. Making gold felt like it should be illegal but apparently wasn't unregulated to Yaoyorozu. Endeavor's family, on the other hand, she had never heard good things about. Toru watched as other people tried to use their quirks in interesting ways. Jiro, after throwing her ball, quickly plugged in her headphone jacks into her legs and let out a hugely loud noise that moved the ground itself and had the ball flying farther. Kaminari yet again tried to give his ball power by letting out an electric shock, making himself stupider in the process. Aoyama used his navel laser to push his ball farther and gave a dramatic pose. Tokoyami's dark shadow threw the ball farther than a normal human could. Koda yelled for a bird to help carry his ball farther, and the bird carried it a significant distance before dropping it. On the other hand, Shiro and Mineta, who had throwing-based quirks, had more experience throwing things than the average person, and did decently well as well. Guess I still have to do better. Realistically, Toru had done the math. She knew she wouldn't lose because Midoriya was doing so poorly. All she had to do was outperform Midoriya after all, and she'd remain in the school, but there was a sliver of pride in her that wanted to outperform Mineta too. Guess it's my turn. Mina gave Toru a thumbs up and went to the circle. Don't worry about me though. I'm buff. I've been practicing to be a hero all through middle school, so I'm at an advantage against all these people who decided to be a hero recently. True to her word, despite not being able to use her acid quirk here, Mina was able to do a pretty good throw. 69 meters, better than Bakugo without the use of his quirk. She gave a peace sign and smiled. Kirishima also did a pretty good amount. He seemed pretty buff even without his quirk on, so he could throw a decent amount as well. Ida went up to play. I'm at a disadvantage here because I train my legs, not my arms. I think I understand the purpose of this lesson, to show me my weaknesses. He smiled and nodded despite only throwing the ball 49 meters. I have quite a lot of room to grow. As long as you know that, Ida, you'll be fine. Aizawa nodded and recorded the display. Finally, it was Toru's turn. She walked up to throw. Aizawa looked at her with a look of pity. Joke's on him. I've thrown projectile weapons before. She was better at aim than distance, of course, but she was confident with her training she could average around 90 meters, which was farther than Mineta's 72. She got her arm ready and was about to throw. Should I throw as far as possible though? For my pride? Showing the upper limits of my ability probably isn't a good idea. She decided she should probably have weak arms, despite her desire to crush Mineta. She threw around 47 meters. She fake shook her head. Throwing a ball is hard. I really need to work out my arms. So you pat her back. It's about the way you flick your wrist. You'll get the hang of it eventually. I was kinda wondering if you would have like secretly very buff arms or something. Mina sighed. But that is around the range an average person would do. Toru scanned her classmates' faces. Midoriya seemed lost in thought and Tokoyami seemed to look at her worriedly. Maybe it would help more if you removed your clothes. Then nobody could see you even do the events. Mineta suggested. That's allowed, I'm pretty sure. Mina took off her shoes after all. Mina glared at him. She could see the bit of drool in Mineta's mouth and the look in his eyes. Thanks for the suggestion, but I think I just have to try harder. It's all about the attitude after all. Toru replied, trying to sound positive and like she wasn't absolutely disgusted. So you sighed. I'm sorry for doubting you about what he was like, but maybe that would be a good suggestion? Then you could at least trip someone while running. Sabotage isn't allowed, remember? Mina pointed out. So you sighed and looked worried about her new classmate. After all, Toru was at a clear disadvantage. She might even get expelled. As they were distracted, the next student walked up to pitch. Toru watched out of the corner of her eyes as Ochako touched the ball and it floated up into the sky to never return. Infinity, Aizawa said. Infinity? Wow. All her classmates started chattering. Does she like instant win because she got infinity? Toru heard Kirishima whisper. A levitation quirk? Or perhaps a zero-gravity one? Toru tried to analyze it, but suddenly the next student, Midoriya, up. He was looking worried. Sorry, Midoriya, but you're my savior for doing worse than me. Toru let out a mental apology to the student who would likely be expelled. She heard Ida and Bakugo talking about him. Ida seemed about as worried for Midoriya as Mina was for her. Had the two of them suddenly become friends while she wasn't looking? Bakugo uttered the strange words though that Midoriya was quirkless. I haven't seen him use any of his quirk yet, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have one, right? He's a little quick to judgment. Toru decided. Midoriya nervously threw with all his might, but the ball only made it 46 meters. Toru let out a sigh of relief that it was 1 meter lower than her pitch. Midoriya looked shocked and devastated. He looked at his own shaking hands. But I tried using my quirk. I erased it, Aizawa said, simply staring at him. How did someone like you enter our school? It defies reason. Toru frowned as Aizawa slowly approached Midoriya shaking considerably and Aizawa's scarf now floating around him. That seems truly discriminatory. Choosing one student and picking on them. Midoriya hadn't done anything wrong besides being bad at everything so far to warrant this sort of focus after all. Ochako gasped in the background and quickly hushed herself. Toru heard some of the students chattering about Aizawa's erasering quirk. And how he was a hero known as Eraserhead who worked underground. A lot of students hadn't heard of him, but some had explaining he didn't like media exposure. From what I've seen, you can't rein in your quirk's full power. Meaning you can't control it or use it efficiently at all. Aizawa explained, his voice dripping with anger as he got closer and closer to Midoriya. Did you believe someone would come save you after you crippled yourself again? Midoriya looked horrified. And no, I didn't. I just dash. He tried to offer a feeble protest. Aizawa's scarf wrapped around Midoriya, grabbing him and pulling him abruptly into place so he couldn't move. Whatever hopes you may have had of your rescue, nobody would be in a position to come to your aid. He paused. There's a certain insufferable hero who made a name for himself rescuing over 1,000 people from a disaster all by himself. Everyone knew who Aizawa was talking about. Toru especially. All Might. You have his courage, but all you do is manage to run around like a blockhead who needs saving himself. Face it, you can't become a hero with your power. Aizawa growled. Toru found herself frowning. Well, this seems needlessly unfair. Kaminari over there also has a power that injures himself. He's still stupid Ely babbling in the corner. I'm just invisible and haven't injured myself but still aren't doing great. Midoriya's been at a disadvantage throughout this entire test because Aizawa has the tendency to put him last to try, while Kaminari has been up first or in the middle in all these events, so he has time to recharge his brain cells. In a real villain attack they don't give you that chance. She knew she shouldn't have genuine emotions or feelings for any of her classmates, after all they were tools to be used for her purposes, but she couldn't help but feel real pity for Midoriya over how unfair this whole situation was. I don't know any of his skill sets, but perhaps he'd be useful to master. Maybe after he gets expelled, I'll tell him about Midoriya. He'll certainly have the resentment against heroes after this experience to become a villain. Poor Midoriya. But Toru was sure he could still be used after he was expelled. I gave you back your quirk. If you can't not injure your entire body, you're out. Let's get this over with. Aizawa sighed. Midoriya was shivering but nodded. He took the ball and Aizawa didn't even keep his eyes on him, instead dripping eye drops in his eyes. Midoriya then took a deep breath and concentrated. Everyone was watching him to see what he would do. He moved forward and through the place of last impact with his finger glowing and letting out a huge amount of force. The ball shot up tremendously and Aizawa finally smiled amazed. 705.3 meters. He smiled. Midoriya pumped his fist despite clearly having a mangled finger and being in extreme pain. I can still move, Midoriya said confidently. Aizawa looked stunned but pleased. What kind of quirk is that to injure his body but get extreme strength? Toru wondered. All her classmates looked amazed but happy that Midoriya had succeeded. Your finger's broken. It reminds me of the entrance exam. What an odd quirk. Toru heard Ida say. What an odd quirk indeed. But although he performed well in this event, I wonder if he'll be able to do the other events better than me because of the pain. Bakugo seemed incredibly angry and immediately ran forward. What is this, Deku? Explain now. His hands were explosive, but Aizawa grabbed him with his scarf and erased his quirk almost instantly. Stop making me use my quirk so much. Aizawa growled and dealt with Bakugo swiftly. I've got dry eye. There was a chance she could lose if Midoriya actually had a power-based quirk. If he had any pain resistance training, he could probably beat her and she'd be at the bottom of the results. Toru was beginning to get nervous. The sixth test was sit-ups, although Toru wasn't exactly sure how anyone's quirks besides a stretching-based quirk or power-based quirk could benefit in that exam. There wasn't much cheating she saw of besides people who just had pretty good core strength. And the only people she saw doing decently terrible were Mineta, who couldn't figure out how to bend his legs and do a sit-up, and Midoriya, who looked like he was in incredible pain. Her partner, who was keeping her feet down, was Mina. Tsu and Tokoyami were spotting each other as well. I think everyone's just going to get around average on this one, Mina declared. Well, besides poor Midoriya and Mineta, who look like they're doing terribly. Toru continued her sit-ups. I don't think that's true. Tsu's doing really well, right? Mina glanced over and saw Azui still doing her sit-ups. Ugh, you're right, she's got the agility of a frog. And Kirishima and Bakugo look like they have abs of steel. They're going way too fast to keep up with. I guess us normal people just have to be satisfied with normal scores. Toru nodded. She could deal with normal. Once she and Mina switched who was spotting, she noticed Mina was going quickly and competitively as well. You say you've got normal abs, but yet you're going just competitively as the rest of them? Toru giggled. She noticed Tokoyami was using his quirk. Dark Shadow was pulling him up to do sit-ups and giving him encouragement. I don't think I can do this. I think I have to take the 0 this time. Toru heard Ojiro say to the teacher. I can't lie down flat because of my tail. Just balance on your tail then and do sit-ups in the air. Aizawa instructed. Poor Ojiro had a harder job and had to balance in midair while doing sit-ups. Seventh test was seated toe touch. Agility-based quirks seemed favored yet again. Toru noticed with great distress that Mineta was able to do this one quite easily cause of his short little legs. Most people were agile enough to do this one with great ease. The only person struggling seemed to be Midoriya yet again, who was in quite a lot of pain. Shoji could grow extra arms, of course, and didn't even have to stretch forward to touch his toes. And Azui was incredibly agile and could touch her toes in a matter of seconds. Ojiro was finally able to use his tail to touch his toes. Aizawa went down the list scoring people. Some people he scolded for a moment on working out more. Ochako, Aoyama and Kaminari got his wrath. When he went down the line to Toru, he stared for a moment. Crap. Am I contorting myself too weirdly? How long are your fingers, Hagakure? Aizawa asked. I don't have a ruler on me. I would guess an average amount. Toru replied. Are you touching your toes? Aizawa asked. Toru realized with horror that Aizawa couldn't see if she could complete her task and might mark her down. I wouldn't lie about this. If you don't believe me, you could erase my quirk and see my real body. Aizawa sighed and ran his fingers through his hair. My erasure quirk doesn't work on you mutant types. It could stop you from moving the extra limb, like say for Ojiro's tail dash. He demonstrated by looking over at Ojiro and activating his quirk. Ojiro's tail went limp. Hey! Ojiro frowned sadly. Aizawa turned over. But because you're fully invisible, it doesn't seem to do anything to you. After all, your body doesn't gain any benefit from the invisibility. So you don't stop moving or anything. As if to demonstrate, he activated his quirk and nothing happened. I guess it's because it only works on things I can see. And I can't see you. Toru smiled to herself. She knew Aizawa couldn't see her broad grin. So the weakness of the erasure quirk is invisibility. I wish I could make other things invisible, but unfortunately I can't. But still, It's a good thing to note that Aizawa can't do anything to me. He could never erase her quirk. That was interesting and valuable knowledge. Oh darn. I guess you can't see that I'm doing my task then? Toru playfully said. I marked you down as that you completed it. That technically counts as using your quirk after all. Aizawa replied. Toru smiled. Thanks to Midoriya's pain, she'd probably succeed and not be expelled. The last event was long-distance run. All the students lined up with their quirks ready. Yaoyorozu already had a rocket somehow that she seemed to plan to ride. Aizawa whistled. Bakugo blasted off. Ida ran as fast as he could. Todoroki and Mina slid away. It seemed like just a repeat of the 50 kilometers dash, besides the fact that Aoyama was doing worse since it was based on endurance. Toru tried to pretend she was struggling while actually doing a very light jog. Don't want to do too well, just do better than Mineta and Midoriya. She reminded herself. Midoriya was really struggling, wheezing and looking like he could collapse from the pain at any moment, but getting through it nonetheless. Mineta, on the other hand, was just out of shape. Kaminari and Jiro seemed a little bit ahead of her, not using their quirks this time to cheat. Kaminari seemed slightly naturally faster but not too far ahead. Jiro was at a nice average pace but way ahead of Toru and Mineta. Toru saw in the distance Koda riding on a sea of squirrels. Well, that's an interesting way to use a quirk. Toru decided, running as if she was taking the scenery in. Every now and then she would drop her pace to be behind Mineta to appear as if she was struggling, then pick up her pace to be in front of him just to show him that he was going to lose, and he would start yelling. It was kind of funny. Master always said the most fun villainy was to give someone the taste of victory before taking it away. I guess he was right. By the end of the run she came in front of Mineta though. She never did let him experience that victory for long enough to feel safe. I tried my hardest too, but at least I beat Midoriya. I probably won't be expelled then. Mineta frowned. But he did really well at the ball throwing, better than me. So what if I am in last place? I wish she could dream, even if the math likely didn't match up. Maybe I should have helped Midoriya run faster so he could have beaten Mineta. Had a hint of sadness as Aizawa showed them all the scoreboard. As she predicted, she placed just above Mineta and Midoriya in 18th place. Midoriya looked devastated being in last, but he sighed as if he expected it. I'm so relieved you didn't make it last, Toru. Mina cheered her on. I made it. I'm not out yet. Toru sighed in relief. Oh yeah, that expulsion thing was a lie. Aizawa revealed. He smiled as everyone's faces became stunned. It was a logical ruse to pull out your best performance. He revealed a big grin on his face. Toru's eyes stared blankly. What? So you mean I worked so hard to beat Mineta for nothing? Yaoyorozu sighed. Come on. Use your brains a little, guys. Of course, it was a ruse. She scolded everyone. I can't believe I didn't see that. The smart recommendation student realized that. But Toru, someone who had been trained all her life to be a spy, hadn't? She felt ashamed. Aizawa turned around. And with that it's over. Your curriculum guide is back in the classroom, so go look them over. And Midoriya? Go to Recovery Girl and patch yourself up. Midoriya nodded quickly and ran off. Toru couldn't help but feel frustrated at the wasted efforts. The day was almost over, and she hurriedly packed up her things and her curriculum guide. Was it a ruse though? What kind of teacher is Aizawa to torment students like that? How best can I use and exploit him? She decided it was time to do a little spy work, get some information. After all, now she knew Aizawa couldn't stop her. She went to the bathroom before leaving school and discarded all her clothes. As quietly as possible, trying to keep her own nudity from unsettling her, she sneaked into the faculty office. I'm a tool. She reminded herself to steady her breathing. Nobody seemed to notice her. She had walked in when another teacher had opened the door. And although this was dangerous, it was a good practice of how well she could sneak around teachers. Everybody was reading over their own course material. Toru noticed a female teacher, Midnight, Ectoplasm, Present Mike, and a guy made of concrete, all looking over their own material. She counted herself lucky that Hound Dog wasn't there. She believed information revealed he was on the staff and he could use a smell quirk. She didn't have a distinct smell, but she was sure to a dog or something she had some smell. She needed to find a perfume that masked any smell or something. She decided to sit in the corner or something and watch the teachers, or wait for them to leave so she could poke around in computer records. However, eavesdropping proved to be the most useful tool in revealing the truth. Did Aizawa expel all his students again? Midnight looked up from her work and asked. I pity the poor first-year students in his class. So he did expel students at some point. Meaning it wasn't a ruse. Toru felt herself grinning. There had been truth to Aizawa's competition, although it seems he had gone back on it. He only temporarily expelled his students last year. Present Mike defended. He wanted them to experience what death felt like once. Death doesn't feel like expulsion, and they now have a permanent record on their file. Midnight defended. But, well, did he do that again to these new first years? Not. I convinced him not to. Present Mike replied, but he did watch the students' entrance exam videos. And I think he was planning to expel a few that weren't UA material or something. He didn't like some kid with explodey arms. I'm not exactly sure what explodey arms means. Toru. It likely referenced Midoriya's quirk. But he must have proven himself to Aizawa. So he was planning an expulsion. He likely assumed Midoriya was going to come in last due to watching all of our entrance exam videos. He had needed an excuse to target Midoriya. Thus, the quirk exam had been held. Suddenly things started making sense of why Aizawa had tried to talk to her a few times. He watched all of our entrance exam videos except for mine because there was no footage of me to watch. Thus, I became his biggest threat to expelling Midoriya because I had the potential to come in last place. Aizawa seemed heavily biased. After all, if as he said he wanted to expel Midoriya because he wasn't UA material, why not target Kaminari or Mineta as well? Kaminari had injured himself several times with his quirk, making himself stupider and thus requiring rescue, and Mineta, well, he was just an awful person. He harassed and ogled women. Did that not matter to UA? Was that something that did not make someone's hero material? She waited for the doors of the office to open again and she slipped out, finding her way back to the bathroom. Nothing about how heroes acted made sense. She understood why Aizawa had stopped targeting Midoriya. After all, in the end he had potential and used his quirk intelligently, but why were certain qualities like being violent and creepy not something to discard people from heroics? Was it just the way hero society was, or was this Aizawa's own biases? It's more likely that it's hero society as a whole that doesn't care about the Mineta and Bakugos of the world. I've heard of many heroes like both of them. And from what she had witnessed of Aizawa, he seemed to be at least trying to help some of his students. At several points he had made suggestions to them of what to train and focus on, except for her. He seemed either at wit's end over an invisible quirk or flustered by it because he had never seen one and knew that he couldn't do anything like erase it. She had a good picture of the way Aizawa was now. She had a good feel for a character analysis on him after hearing the information that he had been planning to expel someone, and how he wanted students to experience the feel of dying. This would be quite useful for her to exploit in her spy work. A good amount of students had already started going home by the time Toru left the bathroom and started heading home. She noticed most of the students walking at a slow pace through the big UA gate were older students, or more diligent-looking ones who had taken the extra time after school to tour UA or check out the library. The younger students from my class must have already rushed home to tell their parents all about their first day. Toru observed seeing not many familiar faces in the large grass yard, or on any of the benches lining the walkway. That wasn't to say she didn't see any familiar faces. She noticed Momo lost in thought, carrying many books in her arms. I should observe her carefully since she was one of the recommendation students. She's probably leagues above the rest of our class then. Toru told herself. Each of her 19 classmates were her enemies. She needed to observe their weaknesses and skill sets so she could ensure they didn't get in the way of All for One defeating All Might. She needed them to never suspect her and for them to have a good impression of her. Still, even though Yaoyorozu placed first in the quirk test, she's prone to jumps in logic that are incorrect and being too confident to question herself. Toru reminded herself, remembering how Momo had said Aizawa had clearly been lying when in actuality he had not been. Besides Yaoyorozu, Toru noticed one other classmate late to heading home, the other recommendation student, Todoroki. He was lying on a park bench looking up at the sky calmly as if to procrastinate on the journey home. He seemed to be closing his eyes as if relaxing. Is he one of those aloof, chill guys? Toru wondered. Todoroki was another student to look out for. He was extremely powerful and was also the son of the second strongest hero, Endeavor based on his last name. Perhaps he's not resting but procrastinating on going back to his house. Considering the large burn scar on his face and the rumors Toru had heard during some of her street corner intel work of just listening into the populace pass by while she pretended to just not be there, Endeavor seemed prone to large lashes of anger. He didn't sound like a good person to be around. Pro heroes really are the worst. Although I shouldn't jump to conclusions about his home life, if that is the case, I can't help but feel pity for him. Toru knew nobody noticed her shooting the sleeping man a pitiful glance. They couldn't see her head move at all after all. If that is the case, hopefully, he gives up this foolish pursuit of being a hero and turns to villainy as a way of exposing Endeavor. That would be the smart choice after all. She sighed and continued walking. Surely someone would find it weird just a school uniform standing there after all. It looked like the business courses and general studies had left the school as quickly as possible once the day had ended because Toru didn't spot any uniforms associated with them. The support course, however? A lot of people from there were heading back late as if they had tried to spend extra time getting to know the school. You invisible girl. Toru heard a voice call from behind her. She stopped momentarily and waited for whoever was calling for her to come up. She saw the familiar face of Hatsume run up, her goggles still on her head, and looking very tired. It seemed apparent that Hatsume had spotted Toru from deeper in the building and then rushed towards her. Let me catch my breath. She wheezed. It had been quite a fast dash. Your name was Toru, right? Yep. And you were Mei, right? Toru smiled and greeted. Did you need something? Mei frowned. I just didn't see you in class. Did you get placed into class G or H or something? I'm glad you made it through the entrance exam, but I was mad confused when I didn't see you during orientation. Toru blinked, confused. Mei's eyes zoomed in as if trying to figure out what expression Toru was making, despite being unable to. The silence was slightly deafening. There is no class G or H in the hero courses. Could it be you're not a hero student, Mei? Toru asked. Mei's jaw dropped open. Wait, you weren't trying out for the support course? She pointed at Toru, stunned. Toru shook her head, then crossed her arms to make her body language more clear. I'm a hero student. I honestly thought you'd be one too, since your invention I saw that first day was so cool. I thought you'd beat the robot exam easy. What happened? Mei stared blankly and then let out a loud laugh. She threw her whole body back as if the idea of her being a hero was that hilarious. Haha, me a hero? You thought I'd be a hero? Does it not interest you? I'm really sorry if I had a misconception of your character. It's just you were so helpful on exam day I thought you'd want to be a hero. Toru frantically shook her arms to apologize. I'm sorry. Mei stopped laughing, wiping the tear from her eyes. Oh, thank you. But even if I could be a hero, I'm not interested. That perked Toru's interest. Someone in this school finally isn't hero-obsessed? What do you mean could be a hero? You have more skills than some of the heroes I've seen. You'd make a great one. Mei jumped a little startled by that as if she had never heard that. Well, she scratched her cheek nervously. You must have noticed that the hero course favors power-type quirks. So much of their exams put an emphasis on the user's quirk instead of their ability. Support items are allowed in a lot of the tests, but you have to go through a lot of channels to allow them in the normal quirk strengthening practice courses. And the channels usually require a medical excuse. Mei lectured. I did notice that only Aoyama was using a support item. He wore some sort of belt to channel his naval laser. I only have a quirk that lets my eyes zoom into things. So, it wouldn't be a good fit for the hero course. Mei waved her hand. But even if I did have some sort of power-type quirk, I really want to focus on making my babies. I want to make other people shine with my inventions. She then winked. And of course, make a lot of cash from investors. Heroes made a ton of cash too, but it seemed more of a dangerous occupation. Studying in the support course seemed a ton smarter. Smart. Toru congratulated. Still, I can't help but feel disappointed that you're not a hero too. You'd probably be way stronger than Mineta or say Bakugo or even Ida. Her shoulders drooped. It's actually a good thing that she's not a hero. That means technically Mei isn't my direct enemy. But still, if we had one other person in the class, maybe some of the worst students like Mineta wouldn't have made it in. Mei grinned at the compliment. Sounds like you don't like those guys very much. It was just an example. I like most of them fine, aside from Mineta. Toru waved her hands. Sorry for the confusion on what course you were applying for. Mei gave a sheepish grin. It's fine. After all, I had the same confusion. I thought you'd apply for the support course since intel gathering quirks are always required in operations for heroes. I thought an invisibility quirk would be so cool to have in support. She sighed, but man was I wrong. Well, at least I can design babies for you. Toru smiled at the other girl's excitement even though she didn't intend to be a hero at all or use her support items. I don't think I would be able to use support items since everything I use that's physical gives away my position. Mei frowned. She looked genuinely crushed, and then she moaned and looked lost in thought. A big grin then appeared on her face and she zoomed her face closer to Toru's even though she still couldn't see Toru. Wait, you're a hero. That means you need a hero costume. Please let me design it. Wait, you probably already sent your hero costume off to support. What was the design? Tell me all about it. Toru frowned. Well, I can't have items floating in midair if I want to be sneaky. Mei nodded, enthusiastically waiting for the cool information. So I don't really have a costume? Toru replied. Wait, what? Mei frowned. You mean you just have to be naked? That's your costume? Well, I asked for some boots and big white gloves so people can see my hand actions. Toru replied. And the boots? Mei's face was draining of color at the shock and disappointment. Just simple white lace-up ones. Just to protect my feet, you know? Toru replied. That's unacceptable. Mei's knees collapsed on the ground and she threw her head up like she was about to scream. That's so boring. Some of the older students were now glancing at them. Momo was long gone at this point, but Todoroki still had not woken up. I'm sorry for being a disappointment, Mei. Toru's voice did seem honestly apologetic. She looks like she's taking my hero outfit harder than me. And I'm the one who has to be naked non-stop. No, it's fine. It does make sense considering your quirk and options, but still, your hero outfit is being naked? What about when it's cold? How will you do work then? And aren't there laws against revealing hero outfits and public nudity? And by and large it's just so boring. Someone with a cool quirk like you doesn't deserve it. Toru smiled because she understood all of Mei's points. It sounds almost like she's worrying for me. In her own way. Nobody had ever worried about her being required to expose herself before. A tool need not feel shame or fear. You don't dress a screwdriver or wrench in protective gear. You need not worry about being naked, was what All for One had told her after her first panic attack during one of her missions. The cool, calm and logical words had helped her dehumanize herself and put her in a different headspace. But it felt different and odd in a different sort of way for someone to publicly worry for her. I'll just train my cold resistance. Toru tried to ease Mei's worries. And the laws of public exposure don't apply if people can't see you anyway. People just don't want to see things that make them uncomfortable. And nobody can see me at all. She paused. Basically, I've already got a pass and approval for that. Mei still looked distraught. But, I don't really have any other option, honestly, Toru said softly. Mei's eyes spun as if the gears in her head started turning. There's no support gear that can turn invisible? That's true. I've never read about any clothing or anything turning invisible. And I don't think there's any other pro hero quirk that can turn objects invisible. Yeah, so you don't have to worry about it. If it's something we can't change, we just have to accept it, you know? Toru pulled Mei up off the ground. It was hard because Mei's body seemed to go limp as if she was that distraught by how boring Toru's costume was. I almost feel like I'm comforting her more than I'm comforting me. And I'm the one who has to be naked. Mei grabbed Toru's hands and stared deeply into what she assumed and what actually were Toru's eyes. I'll work hard. I'll figure something out. It might be my first day, but I swear to you I'll find a way to make your hero outfit more interesting and have more clothes. But I need something invisible, Toru protested. I'll be the first designer that comes up with how to make invisible gear then. Mei pumped up her fist. She then smiled as if her despair had faded away now that she had a goal. She was still holding Toru's hands and Toru couldn't help but feel her face heat up. Are all these normal people in normal families so touchy-feely? When will she let go of my hands? Toru wondered. She didn't find she hated it though. Mei was just thinking of her after all. I'll work super hard, and by the time that we graduate UA I promise you that I'll come up with something. You work on being a hero and I'll make amazing gear for your interesting quirk. Mei stroked her hand as if feeling her new goal. That caused Toru to jump a little. She continued blushing. I know you don't believe me that I can do it, but I'll prove to you that I can. Mei frowned. Why do you think I don't believe you? You sound so confident. Try your best, Mei. I'm rooting for you. Toru tried to be her cheerful fake self. Mei frowned. You sounded like you had just accepted your circumstances before. And you were trembling for a moment. And your voice sounds a little bit fake when you say you're rooting for me. Crap. Does it? She's more observant than I gave her credit for. Toru bit her lip. That's all right though. I don't mind that you don't believe in me. You've exposed an important fact about hero society to me after all that a lot of heroes are stuck with exposing clothing because of their quirks. And problems like that, they need solutions. And that's what the support course is for. When a hero has a problem we find the solution. Mei gave a thumbs up. And now I have something to work for. When I succeed, Toru told herself. Would you let me be your exclusive designer? Mei asked excitedly. I think you'd be the only one able to design for me if you succeed. Toru giggled. But I won't be a pro hero so no. Mei beamed, believing that was a yes. That means I already have a deal with a future hero. She pumped her fist. Thanks. And with that she waved and ran off at light speeds, likely to go home and pore over some magazines. Toru waved back. She's a strange person, but not a bad one. She went about her way. I'm home. She turned on the light of her empty house. She sighed at the silence and emptiness. She approached the couch in front of a very nice TV. Something a regular family was sure to have. This is the first time I've had a house so ordinary though. The middle school she had attended for practice socialization last year hadn't checked home addresses. So although her residency had already been bought and prepared, she hadn't actually lived in it. It had just been a large empty house. She pushed the sofa to the left slightly to reveal a locked hatch on the floor. She unlocked the hatch and reached her hand into the hole to pull out a small burner phone which she had been given to communicate with the League of Villains. It was only connected to one other phone which she assumed All for One still had unless he had given it to Shigaraki. She pressed call and after a few rings, All for One answered. Was the first day successful? His voice was low, bored almost, but hearing it filled Toru with relief like a drug addict needing their drug. She had felt so lonely without hearing her master's voice for so long. Like she was dusty tool left alone on a shelf. Yes. I don't think anyone's suspicious. Toru whispered even though she knew no neighbors could hear her. She was paranoid by nature. My homeroom teacher is Eraserhead. I was surprised because none of my information said he taught at UA. Oh, that is interesting. Be careful not to tell Shigaraki. I want to see what he'd do against such a matchup. All for One instructed. The original plan was for Toru to stop by the bar Kurogiri manned once a week on her day off of school. She was supposed to provide updates and keep in touch with the villains if circumstances provided it and the bar wasn't being watched nor her. But there was always the chance All for One would require her to speak with Shigaraki sooner, so she wasn't quite sure when she'd see Shigaraki. She didn't particularly enjoy Shigaraki's company though, so she wasn't looking too forward to talking to him. It was a mixture of the competitive nature between the two of them to get All for One's attention and the fact that he glared at her a lot. Did you encounter All Might? All for One asked. No, not today. Our class tomorrow is supposed to be with him though. Toru replied, some sort of practice field work probably. I see. Well, take note at what the most egotistical of hero society looks like face to face. All for one ordered. Yes, sir. Toru nodded. Do you have anything else to report? All for one asked. Toru thought for a moment. I don't really want to tell him I was almost expelled the first day. I attempted to sneak into the teacher's offices. Nobody noticed me, although Hound Dog was not in the office at that point. So, infiltration in the future to gather information should be smooth as long as Hound Dog isn't patrolling. I request contacting Jiren for a newer sense suppressant. Request approved. All for one replied. When you meet Shigaraki again, I'll have his team give it to you. There's nothing else you think is pertinent that I know? Toru scanned her mind quickly. Does he already know the trouble I got into? Is he doubting my loyalty because I haven't told him about Aizawa's test? Being around heroes has truly shown me the darkness of hero society. The biases toward certain kinds of quirks, the prejudices not expelling heroes that are clearly just want fame, girls, or to free their violent impulses. It's awful. All for one chuckled. Tools don't need to think, Tor. He scolded very politely. Toru frowned, bashful. I'm sorry, master. Then there's nothing I can think of that needs to be reported. Any dangerous classmates of yours? All for one asked, revealing the answer he wanted her to report. He wanted me to report on my classmates. Toru thought for a moment. Class A has 20 students in all. 18 passed the exam and 2 were recommendation-based. The 2 that were recommendation-based stand leagues above the others. One has a creation-based quirk and is quick-thinking, and another is a Todoroki with a strong ice quirk. Toru reported. A creation quirk. Interesting. He seemed to mutter to himself. From the Yaoyorozu family, I assume? Yes, sir. Too bad. If she were from some nobody family, I would have captured her for myself. A big family like hers, though, would cause a fuss if their child was spirited away, so to say. And the investigation might lead to revealing my interest in UA. All for one seemed genuinely disappointed. Heroes and their legacies are something that I thought I'd never understand, but I think I'm finally starting to get it, the desire for a successor to continue on your work. Toru wasn't quite sure what he was talking about, but she knew she was just too stupid to understand since she was a tool. What other quirks do your classmates possess, Toru? All for one asked. Toru thought. There's this girl with ear jacks hanging out of her ears. She can connect the phone jacks to her body and make sounds so strong that it can move things. The mutation-type quirks are always so boring. They tend to give away someone's powers and abilities. And to use them is rather difficult. This girl, though, by the description of her ear jacks, is probably related to the famous musicians of the same quirk type. It seems you have another famous classmate. All for one revealed. A lot of people in positions of privilege, it seems, get to this school. Are you only interested in stealing my classmates' quirks? Should I skip the mutation types? No, I have other plans. Give me an abridged version of your mutant-type classmates, though. All for one replied. Toru nodded. There's a boy with a tail, a girl who has the characteristics of a frog, a guy with tape elbows, a guy with balls growing out of his head, a boy with multi-arms that can grow other arms on his arms. Excuse me? That seemed to startle All for one a little bit. Yeah, he can grow his body parts on his arms. I think that's how it works, at least. Toru replied. I haven't observed anyone enough to get the full power of their quirk, though. Well, it's certainly unique. All for one sounded disgusted for a moment, thinking about the armed student. I suppose you could say he's armed for danger. Toru did not laugh. She just continued. Finally, of the mutant types, there's someone from the Ida family with engine legs. I believe. Rough audience, I suppose. All for one sighed. Interesting that you have another pro-hero classmate. I'm surprised he didn't get in on recommendation. The Ida family, from the information Toru had heard, was known for the pro-hero ingenium, along with other engine-legged heroes. And of the non-mutant variety? Do you know any of your other classmates' quirks? All for one asked. I haven't fully observed the others, but I believe there's a girl with a levitation-type quirk or something to do with gravity, There's someone who can discharge electricity at the cost of his brain power, someone who explodes things with his hands, someone who explodes his own bones. Very interesting batch of quirks that are allowed into the hero course. Education is truly faltering. All for One wasn't sure what to say about a quirk that caused your own bones to explode. It certainly is a quirk I would never want. He finally commented. It's got some power, I think. It's some sort of thing that enhances his strength at the cost of exploding his bones? I'm not quite too sure. Toru admitted. Anyway, there's also someone who has a dark creature he can manipulate inside of him, someone who controls animals, a girl with acid, a naval laser, another strength-based quirk, and someone who can get hard. All for One sounded surprised yet again. I don't believe that is a quirk. You certainly have some classmates with some interesting quirks. The sound of the education system failing him was very evident in his voice. I'm glad I'm not the only one very disturbed about UA's standards. Was it Bakugo's quirk that had driven All for One over the edge, or Mineta's balls on his head quirk? To be fair, Toru didn't quite know the rules yet on that one, so she hadn't fully described that the balls could bounce. Still, she smiled to herself, thinking All for One and her were on the same thought process. She remained unaware that it was a mixture of Midoriya's bones exploding, Shoji's arms, and the way she had described Kirishima's quirk that had broken him. All for One regained his composure. Well then, I believe it's time to end our little chat, Toru. He said politely. Oh, before I forget, I have a mission for you this week, Toru. Toru perked up and listened close. I had thought my mission during the first week was to just observe. Does Master already have a plan for how to use me? Sometime this week I want you to find information on when Class A will take a field trip with All Might attending. I would like information on where this trip will be, along with information on what type of security system the location will have. When you have obtained this information, I would like you to trigger UA's gate opening and sneak out of class and tell Shigaraki the information. I'll arrange the mass media to mob UA the day of your exchange. That way they'll infiltrate UA too, and nobody will question someone getting out of UA at the same time. Not only that, but UA will be so frazzled trying to keep the mass media at bay that they won't have time to realize their information has been robbed. When you see the mass media at the gates, I want you to open the gates during the lunch rush, so that will give you all the morning to gather the information I need. Can you do that? Toru nodded. The UA security system seems to be based around infrared lights, meaning I can bend them and open the gate. And since they don't know I can do that, I won't be found suspicious at all. She reassured, but I don't quite understand. Why can't I just steal the information, bring it home, and then give it to you over the phone? Because I want it to be given to Shigaraki. His group will be attacking All Might on the field trip. It's him I want to face, All Might. All for One replied. Toru didn't quite get it. Why can't I just find the information, memorize it, and tell him in person during one of our meetups then? There's a certain appeal to giving the heroes a rat to chase, Toru. If Shigaraki just showed up on your class's field trip with no lead up, the heroes would try to investigate on how he found out where you were and how to get in. And the principal of UA is Nizu, correct? Yes? Toru replied. Nizu has an intelligence quirk. It boosts his reasoning, so he'd be on the mystery almost immediately. We need to give him a rat to chase. And if we let the mass media in and do the exchange, then he'll assume it's someone in the press's fault that the information was leaked. This will damage UA's trust in the press and will thus start a negative relationship between the two and start UA's spiral towards doom. Toru nodded, finally understanding. I'm glad my quirk can be so useful. Yes. It's very important that you keep the extent of it a secret. Since we're saying your quirk is a mutation-based quirk of just invisibility and nothing else associated with that, be careful in quirk tests. Fumble a few times so that the heroes can assume you need room for improvement and help teach you. Hero teachers love something they can point out the flaws in and for them to train. Give them something to train for you. I'll trip a few times loudly, or make sure my breathing is less steady than normal so that they can assume I need to learn how to not breathe as much to make my invisibility better. Toru agreed. Good girl. All for One told her. And she could almost imagine his hand coming through the phone and giving her a pat on her head. Head pats were something she enjoyed the most. They made her feel like she did a good job. Remember the plan then and keep up your act. Make some close friends and don't make any enemies. Boys in hero courses have rivals. Girls do not. Toru frowned. Did that mean she had to play nice with Mineta? And Bakugo? How was she supposed to not tick off Bakugo? She sat right in front of him. I'll do my best. After all, this is my most important mission. This is what I've been training you for all your life, Toru. We've needed a spy in the hero world for a while now. And you'll be the perfect one. Toru felt herself smiling. All for one hung up and she put the phone away, being careful to put the sofa back into place. My master is so smart. When he met me he knew of my worth. He had this all planned out and took every careful action in teaching me to prepare me for this. She felt giddy as she remembered every action her master had taken with her, teaching her how to talk, preparing her how she should act, reminding her of her purpose, showing her how to use her first gun and knife. All of those sweet memories were preparing for this. And she was finally there. She was finally at UA. Now all she needed to do was not blow it. Toru tried to get to class early the next day to try to already be in her seat before Bakugo and Shoji arrived. Hopefully All Might teaches today. She had never met All Might, but still it was important for her to have several goals for her second day of school. Observing All Might was just one of them. The other was to make no enemies and start forming friendships. Despite her best efforts, Bakugo came in moments before the bell arrived and took his seat, not even sparing the person who sat in front of him a glance. Being early is the best way to prepare for the day and respect you. Ida of course yelled from across the room, I think you're cutting it a bit too close. Yeah? And what do I care what you say, extra? It's not like I have no life like the rest of you losers. I come when I want. Bakugo yelled back. Toru rubbed her head, lucky that Aizawa came into the room before the yelling match could go any further. Prepare for a long day ahead, I suppose? She reassured herself. And then she got a taste as to what a normal day in UA would be like. In the morning were the normal academic classes like English, math and literature and history. Throughout the morning Toru took note mentally of who all the pro heroes who taught the first years were as the class met them for the first time. Present Mike taught English. Midnight taught history. Cementos taught literature. And Ectoplasm taught math. Out of all these teachers, Ectoplasm seems to present the most threat to me because he can have multiple of him observing each of the students during math. Toru thought. Besides Aizawa and All Might, the first-year hero course also had access to the nurse, recovery girl, and the hero lunch rush. It was unlikely that Toru would ever encounter recovery girl unless injured. And lunch rush's entire purpose was to just make food good. Class B was apparently taught exclusively by Vlad King. We also have access to the school counselor, Hound Dog. Toru knew he was the biggest threat to her mission since he had a strong sense of smell. She'd try her best to avoid him if she could because she didn't want him to imprint her scent into his brain and locate her. But I'm pretty good at appearing like a normal, well-adjusted girl. As long as I make lots of friends and don't appear like I'm having any social problems, I shouldn't ever be sent to his office. She took fake notes in her notebook for all her classes, pretending she was decently listening while she made her plans. Master gave me plenty of education when I was younger, so I shouldn't struggle from the curriculum. Math and history were of course her weakest subjects because they weren't as important in spy work as literature and English, but she was still confident enough to keep up. She remembered the days that she was first picked up by All for One, and after him teaching her to be a normal person, he had started a strict studying regimen, likely because he had known since first meeting her that he would eventually want her to infiltrate a hero school. Toru remembered with fondness of being given book after book to study with the incentive of, if you fail you won't be able to blend in well enough, and thus All for One had given her food in exchange for succeeding on tests of his own design. She assumed he had trained many students just like her since he was rather old and had a good system of study. Still, I don't think I'll ever get used to how weird it is to be in a normal classroom. I know this is like how they taught me in my year of middle school, but the learning process is so different and so much more lax than All for One's tutoring. It just felt so low stakes. Like, what was the worst that happened if you failed a test or essay? It wasn't the end of the world. At lunch, Toru quickly found her table that she assumed would be her group of friends. It seemed that even though it was only the second day, people had started grouping up. Mina and Tsuyu were of course her clique. Mina seemed like a bubbly personality who brought other people with her, and she was always happy to chat with Tsuyu and Toru. It's lucky that the people around Mina's desk were so nice. She was able to make fast friends with everyone. Toru realized. She hoped by the end of the week their little group would expand and it would be more than the three of them, but being the second day, making 2 friends wasn't bad. And despite all their conversations being filled with meaningless chatter, Toru thought she was doing well. Finally, after lunch was the class that Toru was most excited for. It was the class All Might was predicted to teach, Hero Basic Training. All Might announced his entrance eccentrically. "I am coming through the door like a normal person," he yelled, finally entering the class. As he marched in front of the podium, Toru heard her entire class chattering in excitement. "He really is teaching here?" Kaminari's mouth was hanging open, but his eyes were filled with joy. A lot of the students didn't seem to have believed that All Might would be a teacher. Toru tried not to turn her head back to scan her classmates' faces, to see if any of them weren't excited. She knew the neck of her costume would have apparently moved if she did that, and Bakugo was right behind her observing her. "As you know, I am All Might." All Might introduced, "And I will teach you Hero Basic Training. It's a subject that will help you train in different ways to help you get the basis of being a hero. As expected, this is the class you'll be in the most." All Might was flexing despite his important information. "There's no need for any more introduction. Let's get right into it. Combat training." There was a buzz of excitement. Yes, another thing that favors power-type quirks. Although I suppose all heroes need to know basic combat training. Toru crossed her hands. Still, there was something exciting about combat training that the other students didn't know about. It gave her a chance to observe the other students in detail in combat situations and analyze their strengths. She smiled to herself as All Might got out everybody's costumes and hurried the students along to outside. Toru hated her costume despite all the reassurance she had told Mei the previous day. She tried not to let her fear show in her hands or her feet, though instead moving her hands frantically like she was getting pumped up. "Ah, so that's your costume too?" Mina was decked in a brightly colored sorts of blue camo outfit. She had looked excited, stretching her exposed arms, being in her costume for the first time. Her excitement levels dropped when she saw Toru's costume, just gloves and shoes. "Well, I suppose it fits." "You have a very unique costume, Mina," Toru told her. "Very flashy." Mina perked up at the compliment. "Thanks. I came up with it myself. I'm sure other people would criticize me for my color choices or design, but honestly, I don't care. I like it." "I have to ask, is there a reason only your arms are exposed instead of your legs?" Toru asked. She wanted to ask about the amount of cleavage Mina had designed into her costume too, but it seemed like something Mina might have just liked to have. "First part a villain's going to aim to stab is the exposed chest, but I'm not going to tell her that," Mina thought. "Well, I can secrete acid through my skin with my quirk. So, I wanted my arms to be exposed in case I needed to jam my elbow into someone's face. I suppose I could have done that for my niece too, but I just didn't want to." She shrugged. "My body, my choices, you know? I can respect that." "Yeah, I get that," Toru said, being naked even though it wasn't fully her choice. "You're really confident, you know that? You've already got the hero attitude." Mina giggled. Toru then noticed Tsuyu's hero outfit. Perfectly designed to look like a frog. Unlike Mina's, it seemed a lot more heavily defended with less skin exposed. It even had frog pads on the shoes. "Wow, Tsuyu. Your outfit is so cute." Tsuyu usually had a blank look on her face, despite the fact that she had a lot of emotion in her voice, but she smiled. "Thank you, Toru. I like it quite a lot too. And Mina, your outfit's looking very fun." Mina beamed. Toru glanced at the other students' outfits to make some quick observations about them before All Might revealed what was going to be happening in class. Ochako seemed to also have enough armor to cover her entire body. Toru wondered if she should compliment her outfit quickly, but unfortunately Ochako was already dealing with Mineta's compliments and trying to keep at bay. Mineta's outfit was quite literally a diaper grape baby. Tokoyami's looked quite emo, and Midoriya's had very clearly taken a lot of inspiration from All Might. "You look quite punk." Toru decided to shoot a quick compliment Jiro's way since she hadn't yet interacted much with her. Jiro twirled her finger around her ear and blushed. Thanks. You look practical too? She was kinda at a loss. Toru gave a peace sign. It's fine. Her eyes drifted to Yaoyorozu, who seemed to be waiting for the class to quiet down. She didn't look exactly happy with her costume either. So, there's someone else who had to wear something quite revealing. Toru wasn't exactly sure why, but from what Yaoyorozu's face looked like, it didn't look like she had fully designed her costume that way by choice. The most clothing she had anywhere was her waist, which had many books on it. Unlike me, Yaoyorozu's body is exposed via sight too. Toru felt a bit of pity for her. Maybe she'd ask her after class what the inspiration for her costume was? Kirishima also had a lot of skin exposed, but unlike Yaoyorozu, he seemed to be pressing his hands together eagerly. He didn't seem disappointed by his outfit choice. Instead, he looked quite pleased. All Might clapped his hands together to get the class's attention. Toru noticed that they were in front of one of the fake cities from the entrance exams. This will be an indoor battle trial. All Might revealed. Although you usually see villain battles and cleanup out in the open, most acts of villainy are actually committed indoors. Thus, you'll need to get used to the terrain. Makes enough sense. Most of my infiltration work is done indoors or on city street corners, after all. Toru nodded to herself as All Might lectured. For this test, you'll separate into villain and hero groups for a 2-on-2 battle. All Might revealed. Mina frantically looked between Tsuyu and Toru, her head instantly going to the fear of them choosing their partners. She was clearly grappling with which of her friends she'd have to choose if that was the case, and despairing. What about the foundational training? Tsuyu asked, oblivious to Mina's internal dilemma. This is the foundational training. All Might barked back. That doesn't make much sense. Toru couldn't help but inwardly criticize in her head. A lot of hero society prohibits the use of quirks, so we wouldn't have enough experience or teachings to do battle already. She shot a glance to Kaminari and Midoriya, who clearly had one-time use quirks at the moment. She sent a little prayer of gratitude up at the sky that she had been given a good teacher like All for One instead of an idiot hero. Suddenly everyone was speaking all at once and asking All Might questions about wins or losses and if they would be expelled if they lost. Can we blow them up? Toru heard Bakugo ask. So Harold? She rolled her eyes. For this training, we'll have some villains guard a fake nuclear weapon they intend on deploying. The heroes must stop them and their nefarious scheme before it's too late. If the heroes capture the villains or reach the nuclear core before the time runs out, they win. If the villains manage to keep the core the whole time or capture the heroes, they win. So, like fake capture the flag, but with the deck clearly stacked against the villains because the heroes don't have a flag themselves? Toru thought to herself. In a real villain situation, it would have made sense if the heroes had a fake person to guard too that the villains could capture as well for a hostage. Or if they just immediately deployed the nuclear weapon. But she wasn't about to criticize the logic openly of a hero test. Your teammates and opponents will be chosen by a lottery. All Might revealed. Some people looked nervous about being paired off with strangers instead of choosing their teammates. Mina looked relieved she wouldn't have to choose between her two new friends. Well, pros often have to make impromptu decisions on the fly and pair up with other heroes they don't really know, so this is probably preparing us for that. Midoriya mumbled aloud. He does kinda tend to mumble a lot, doesn't he? Toru realized, remembering Ida's criticism of him during the first exam. It was observant mumbling though. Props to him. Clasped her hands together as All Might pulled names. Please don't have me on my Netta's team. Please, please, please. Please don't have me compete against him either because I might snap and kick him in the face. To her joy, she was paired off with someone named Ojiro who she didn't know too well. He had a tail. That was all she knew about him. Mina was paired up with the guy with the naval laser. Tsuyu with Tokoyami. Toru sighed in relief. I guess we're together, huh? Ojiro greeted. Nice to meet you, Toru Hagakure, right? I'm Ojiro. It's a pleasure to meet you too. Toru giggled and stuck out her hand to shake his. I'm real excited to be on your team. She pumped her hands up and down. Ojiro smiled in relief that his partner seemed so kind and cooperative. I'm glad I didn't get paired up with one of the more extreme people. I mean, they seem nice and all, But I wouldn't want to worry about not meeting their expectations, you know? His eyes glanced over at Bakugo, who had been paired up with Ida. Oh, I feel you. I was worried about who my partner would be too. And you seem really nice. Toru agreed. Ojiro blushed and looked away. He's one of those guys. Toru smirked to herself. She hadn't paid much attention to Ojiro the first 2 days, but he clearly seemed to be one of those people she called a good dude. A good dude was someone who displayed his emotions easy to read on his face, someone she could clearly figure out what his goals and thoughts were. Basically, someone extremely easy to exploit because of his easy-to-read face. Right now, he's likely trying to figure out how to handle me. Toru decided. Good dudes who were high school age didn't have much experience with girls. The moment they got any attention from them, they weren't quite sure what to do and always got a little flustered. In her year of middle school, Toru had learned that good dudes basically listened to anything a girl said because they were that desperate for their attention. First up will be Pair A as heroes and Pair D as villains. I'd like the rest of the class to observe their battle and analyze it from inside the monitor room. Toru glanced around to see who Pair A and D were. Midoriya and Ochako were Pair A, with Pair D being Ida and Bakugo. Ah well, villainy fits Bakugo. Toru decided, following the rest of the class, to observe the battle. Likely the villain team is going to win though. She decided to guess to herself just for fun. Midoriya didn't seem to know how to use his quirk that well and was at a disadvantage. And Bakugo had quite a lot of power from what she had seen with his explosions. Ida, on the other hand, should have had more training than the average person in the class since he had come from a hero family. The only chance the hero team had of winning was Ochako, who seemed to have a good amount of power considering she had been the only person to get an infinity in the quirk exam. Toru was excited about watching Ochako's quirk. The villain team will be placed in the building. After 5 minutes, the hero team will be led in as well. All Might explained. Everybody nodded understanding, and they were led off to watch Bakugo and Midoriya's battle. The first heroes versus villains battle did not go as Toru expected. For one, Midoriya's team won to her intense surprise. Everybody had watched extra interested in what was happening on screen. All Might had probably intended for the students to watch and hatch strategies of their own and learn from the other students' failures, but instead most of the students had watched the fight like they were watching a sports team compete. The class quickly divided into pro Bakugo and pro Midoriya sides. Mina was one who got extremely invested in Midoriya's fight, cheering him on and shaking her hands in excitement whenever he did something cool, like ducking or dodging Bakugo's blows. Most people were rooting for Team Midoriya, in fact, because it was fun rooting for the underdog instead of the obvious winner. Toru, on the other hand, was watching very carefully and learning more and more about her classmates. Even though there was no sound coming from the monitors, so the class couldn't hear what their classmates were talking about, things could still be observed from their body language. Bakugo's even angrier and rasher than I gave him credit for, moving into action before even thinking. His strength was also his weakness, and he clearly hadn't ever thought he could lose. Midoriya, however, I should re-examine. He seemed like he knew Bakugo's battle style extremely well, as if he had spent years memorizing and observing it. He could dodge and predict every moment. That suggested that Midoriya was both amazing at analysis and had spent a lot of time with Bakugo. If the two were childhood friends though, or something, there was clearly a lot of bad blood between them due to Bakugo's extreme rage towards Midoriya. Too smart. I thought perhaps he was a fan of heroes with no social skills due to his mumbling, but Midoriya is someone I need to really watch out for. Observation and analysis were the thing most likely to catch her after all. And quirk analysis was something that made her incredibly nervous since her quirk wasn't actually just invisibility. Not only that, but Midoriya was very quick on his feet. He used his quirk by the end, but he had kept toe-to-toe with Bakugo in dodging and close combat thanks to his analysis. Ida, on the other hand, had just been a fun time to watch. He had decided to roleplay a villain, and it had been quite amusing even if they couldn't hear him. He had also done a fair amount of planning to combat Ochako, cleaning the room so that Ochako couldn't touch anything. Through that, Toru had learned Ochako, Ida and Midoriya seemed to be close friends, and Ochako's quirk required her to touch something to make it weightless, and it wasn't just straight-up levitation. Not only that, but she could release the weightlessness too, making it fall onto her victims. She couldn't make too much weight weightless though, or else she got sick. Ochako and Midoriya had worked flawlessly together while Bakugo had been mostly focused on crushing his enemy instead of cooperation. Midoriya had distracted Bakugo and blown up the ceiling for Ochako to use her quirk to attack. At the end it was a phenomenal victory for Team Midoriya. When All Might brought the teams back and the class analyzed the battle together, Yaoyorozu explained in perfect detail why Ida had been the best in the match, heavily criticizing Bakugo, Midoriya and Ochako in the process for the amount of damage they had done, chalking things up to them relying on the fact that this was a fake simulation instead of real combat. So Yaoyorozu is one of those kinds of know-it-alls who can't help criticizing everyone. She was one of the recommended students, but Toru couldn't help feeling she was too hard on Midoriya and Ochako. Sure, Midoriya and Ochako had done strong attacks in an indoor area, but they had won. Their luck had paid off and Midoriya had clearly calculated in his head if his attack would hit the fake nuclear bomb. And with that, the second battle was up next. Midoriya was sent to the nurse's office to recover and thus could not witness any more battles. This time it was Toru's team and her and Ojiro had been pulled as villains. She hadn't expected for her to go second, but it was easier to get her battle over with than procrastinate on it. She had been lucky enough to not be paired against Mineta, or even Mina or Tsuyuchi. She didn't want any bad blood to be between them, but instead her team had been paired against Shoji and Todoroki. She knew already ahead of time that her team would likely lose, and likely Yaoyorozu would claim in analysis that it was a bad matchup. Shoji's quirk was to grow different body parts on his arms, which meant he could have a lot of ears or noses to help him detect Toru if she wasn't being serious, which she didn't plan to. Todoroki, on the other hand, was a sheer powerhouse with his ice quirk. I can already see the result of this match, but I should pretend to try my best anyway. All she needed to do was pretend to be enthusiastic and try. So, I've been thinking. Ojiro frowned as he thought. Why don't we focus on capture instead of defense, since Todoroki's a recommendation student, so he's probably pretty powerful. It occurred to Toru that Ojiro probably hadn't been observing Todoroki quite as closely as her and seeing just how powerful him and Shoji were. He looks nervous, but hopeful. Could it be that he thinks perhaps my quirk can get the best of them? He's got a little bit of hope after all. Or perhaps he has some confidence in his tail. To her knowledge, all Ojiro's quirk was having a tail. Okay, why don't I rush down and hide the capture tape downstairs on the first floor near the entrance then, since I can't carry it with me or else they'll see my position? Toru suggested. Ojiro stared at her blankly. He then quickly looked away, clearly having trouble looking at her since she was naked. Hagakure, I don't think you'd be able to get down 5 flights of stairs and then back up within 5 minutes. I wouldn't come back upstairs, I'd hide downstairs, so that I could sneak up behind Todoroki and Shoji. Toru protested. That would considerably cut down my time. She wondered if perhaps she was making a mistake. I planned on sliding down one of the banisters or climbing the side of the building to sneak up on them. Is that showing off too much of my ability? Wait, what am I saying? I won't be showing off any of my ability because nobody will be able to see me. But wait. My plan was to be loud enough for Shoji to detect me so that he doesn't know how good I am at sneaking. Am I taking this too seriously? Sneaking too hard? Ojiro looked worried for a moment. And then he shook his head. No, I don't like that plan. As Yaoyorozu pointed out, relying on the fact that this is practice feels like cheating. And I don't want to rely too heavily on the capture tape. He's quite straight-laced. One of those by-the-books kind of guys. Toru nodded. Not only that, I'd be leaving you to do everything yourself and have to deal with hand-to-hand combat with not only Todoroki but Shoji too. Ojiro's face clouded with extreme worry. I get it. He doesn't want me to get hurt. Another trait of the good dude was that he always wanted to protect the girl. He couldn't even consider that Toru was studying to be a hero too and should get practice in hand-to-hand combat. It was a smart idea though. Ojiro waved his hands, hoping he hadn't made Toru sad. He had clearly seen the droop in her hands as she had listened to him. I've changed my mind. I want to fight defensively, not focus on capture. I wasn't being like myself. I shouldn't be frightened of Todoroki. He smiled confidently. Okay, so you want to prepare the room with traps, or? We could go prepare some wires on the stairs. Ojiro stared at her blankly again as if the idea of traps hadn't even occurred to him. Crap, was I too smart again? Toru silenced herself. He looked away again. My quirk is my tail. I don't want to brag or anything, but my family owns a dojo. I've trained in martial arts and hand-to-hand combat since I was 5. I think I can take Todoroki on. He smiled. So how about I defend the bomb? And me? Tourist. I hate to take the lead on this, but could you gather information or something? I mean that is the best way to use your quirk, right? Toru nodded. Yep. She said out loud. Then you could figure out what Todoroki and Shoji are up to and maybe spy on their plans and then report back? Or do that trap thing you were talking about? Ojiro tried to bring in his partner's input, but they had spent a while going back and forth on their plans. So now I'm fast enough to go up and down the stairs, huh? Toru thought to herself a bit snidely. But that was fine with her. If Ojiro wanted to be a knight in shining armor and take Todoroki on himself, that was fine. If you could distract Shoji too, that would be a big help. Ojiro pressed his hands together. But I think I'll get serious then. Toru took off her gloves and boots. Ojiro instantly looked away, very bashful. But he's probably thinking I should have more modesty as a girl. But he's also thinking this is the right choice since he's not scolding me. Because there is no other option. But you can't look okay? Toru tried to play up the fact that she was just a normal girl, since that was how Ojiro saw her. She put her boots and gloves down. I couldn't even if I tried. Ojiro laughed nervously. She snuck off. And the time began. She was careful to make enough sound with her feet that Shoji should have been able to detect her on that floor. And not only that, but the fact that she was barefoot. She slowed her pace since Ojiro had criticized her speed. She made it to where the stairs were on the same floor when Todoroki made his first move. Ice immediately hit the entire building, freezing everything in place. Things got cold, and Toru could no longer move. Ugh. She shivered out loud. Is that strong, huh? He froze the entire building. That was beyond Toru's calculation, and she heard out of the corner of her ears one pair of feet climb up the stairs. Likely Todoroki had asked Shoji to stay behind so that he wasn't frozen. This is a big problem. Toru realized the imprints her feet had made where she was noticeable. So, Todoroki's ice can help imprint my shape, or at least show the enemy where I am based on my feet prints. She bit her lip in frustration. It was good to know for future reference, but frustrating nonetheless. It really was a bad matchup since my invisibility isn't doing much in this circumstance. Not only that, if this was a real battle, she risked frostbite from being barefoot. Still, in a real battle, how would I win? She wondered. She couldn't just call something a bad matchup and give up. She may have to face Todoroki someday. Todoroki walked upstairs and past her, not noticing her footprints even though they were noticeable. He continued moving towards the fake bomb. You can move if you want. Todoroki said loud enough for Toru to hear as he entered the room Ojiro was defending. But the skin on your feet will come off, so you won't be able to fight your best? That's what I would do if I was battling for real. Toru decided. It would be painful, sure, but she had experienced the first layer of the skin on her feet removed under All for One. She knew how to silence her screams, and from experience she knew other people couldn't see her blood or discarded skin. Nobody could tell if she was injured. As she looked around the room, she noticed how bright it was. Ice reflects light. It makes everything so reflective, she noticed. And she smiled. That's it. It might look like a bad matchup, but it's really not. It's the other way around. I'm a bad match for Todoroki. She grinned wildly to herself. Her true quirk was bending light, thanks to her invisible body. She could store up light in her body and use it as a weapon. She could make large flashes of light or bend reflections, or she could change the colors of light itself. She could even drain the light, but her favorite thing to do was to make light have a more solid mass-like form. Her weapon of choice was light daggers after all. But to do that, it needed to be bright. And ice, well, ice just made everything reflective and gave her more power, further charging her body. Hero team wins. All Might's voice called, and warmth entered Toru's body as Todoroki started quickly melting all his ice. Todoroki must have gotten to the bomb. If I was fighting for real, I'd pull my feet up off the ice and make light steps in the air so I didn't have to step on Todoroki's ice. I'd then continue to make a light pathway a few inches off the ground off of Todoroki's ice, so that I didn't step on it but that it would be close enough to reflect off his ice constantly. Then I'd sneak up on Todoroki and either knock him out or use a projectile weapon. If he threw ice at me, I'd use the reflections from the ice to sort of beam my power. It would have been a great plan if it was for real. Rain fell on Toru from the melted ice. Hot, 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 she remembered to say out loud, jumping up and down. And with that, they had lost completely. But despite Toru's frustrations, she was confident that she had done as much as she could in those circumstances and had appeared like a normal girl. When they all gathered around for a review of the second match, All Might was quick to praise Todoroki. Todoroki was the clear best in the match. Can anyone tell me why? Yaoyorozu raised her hand yet again. He acted in a clear and distinct manner. He didn't let the villains even act, nor did he risk damage to the nuclear bomb. In fact, he froze the bomb too so that the villains couldn't use it or risk deployment. He asked his teammate to leave the building before acting so that he wouldn't risk hurting him either. He acted with extreme control and a skill set befitting a UA student. Sorry. Ojiro glanced at Toru and sent her a quick apology. I overestimated my ability and underestimated his. All Might shot Ojiro a glance of pity. It was clearly a bad matchup. Sometimes these things happen where one team is at a severe disadvantage. Looking at Todoroki's skill set, anyone would have lost, so don't be troubled, my boy. Mina nodded. Cheer up, Toru, you tried your best. Not only that, but Toru was at a disadvantage against Shoji since he had a sensing quirk. If he hadn't found her on the 5th floor, I wonder if Todoroki would have rushed to freeze everything as quickly. Tsuyu observed. After all, it's a hero's job not to kill the villain, and he could have risked serious injury to Toru or made a faulty judgment call if he didn't know where exactly she was. She glanced at Todoroki a little judgmentally, as if he hadn't realized how dangerous his quirk was. Bakugo snorted since he had tried to actually kill someone. That's true. Yaoyorozu agreed. I hadn't given Shoji enough credit where credit was due. His information gathering was quite important to the hero's victory. Todoroki looked horrified at what Tsuyu had said. Obviously, he hadn't even considered if he hadn't been paired with Shoji and if Toru had been in danger. Sorry, he said quietly to where he assumed Toru was. Very true. All Might clapped. Remember, it's the hero's duty to not cause too much damage to the villain. And of course, please remember this is practice. I don't want you actually killing anyone. Of course. He glanced at Bakugo. I will step in if anyone is in serious danger. He paused. Now, can anyone tell me what Ojiro and Toru could have done differently? Nothing. They were in the face of overwhelming ability. Bakugo snorted. Most normal people would give up in the face of overwhelming ability. He snorted as if thinking about Midoriya. Ojiro tightened his fist as if cursing himself. Yaoyorozu sighed. In a practical situation, I think with a bad matchup like this, they should have called for reinforcements. Knowing your own weaknesses doesn't have to be a bad thing. Nobody's suggesting anything besides giving up. Toru frowned. Could Ojiro perhaps have ambushed the heroes instead of going on the defensive? If he had been waiting on the 1st floor with Toru playing defense, perhaps he could have gotten the better of Todoroki before Todoroki iced the whole building. Ida suggested. All Might nodded. It would actually be Shoji Ojiro, and Toru should have gone after first. As mentioned before, information gathering quirks are the most important for heroes since, unlike villains, we have to ensure we adhere to moral standards not to kill. Todoroki's quirk may be powerful, and he has a lot of control over it, but against someone like Toru he could have caused some serious damage accidentally. Because of Shoji that didn't happen, of course, but Todoroki would have had to fight a lot more carefully if he hadn't known where Toru was. All Might pointed out. So even though Todoroki might have killed me accidentally, the teacher didn't say anything? Toru was not impressed. Clearly All Might had only realized that after witnessing the might of Todoroki's powers, but still it was something that did not fill her with confidence in the education system. I guess I didn't think about that. Todoroki nodded. He bowed. Thank you, Shoji, for being my partner. Shoji looked embarrassed. I really didn't do anything at all. In fact, I feel like I was rather useless compared to you. I'll take note of that for next time. Thank you, All Might. Ojiro smiled. He didn't give any advice for things I could have done differently. Toru realized. She could tell by All Might's face that he was still smiling, but his knee was shaking a little bit. Maybe he was realizing a student could have been seriously injured. And with that it was time for the next match. The next match was Shiro and Kirishima versus Tokoyami and Tsuyu. I want to fight to protect even though we're villains. Kirishima told Shiro. I don't want to ambush them or anything. It's just bad sport and not manly. He pumped his hand to his chest. I can be down with that, bro. Although I do think when they get here, we should capture them with capture tape. I just think it would be rather easy for me to get them in tape, you know? Shiro laughed, gesturing to his tape elbow. Kirishima high-fived him. Yeah. Meanwhile, Azui and Tokoyami were planning the method they would use against the villains as well. Azui was making sure to memorize the map as Tokoyami peered over her shoulder. I think you should know a bit about my quirk before we head into battle together, Azui, was it? Tokoyami tried to remember her name correctly. Azui nodded. Call me Tsuyu. All my friends call me Tsuyu. I can do about anything a frog can do. I can give you more details if you need me to, but I think our time would be better spent making a plan and memorizing the floor plan. Tokoyami nodded and agreeing. Well, my quirk is that I have a monster living inside of me. Hello. Dark Shadow greeted as he pulled himself out of Tokoyami and gave a thumbs up. That was not what I was expecting, honestly. Azui replied, staring blankly. Nice to meet you. Does he have a name? His name is Dark Shadow, and don't worry, that's what everyone says. Tokoyami chuckled, patting Dark Shadow on the head. I didn't expect you to have a sense of humor, either, Tokoyami. Tsuyu smiled, happy to make a new friend. Or two. Oh, I like this girl. Let's beat the crap out of these villains, partner. Dark Shadow enthusiastically said. Tokoyami sighed. That's what I was trying to tell you, see you. He paused. Dark Shadow sometimes has a mind of his own. In the darkness he likes to, as some people would say, go wild. Because the lower levels of the indoor building looks rather dark and not well lit, I think I should go alone through them. You worry I'd get hurt? Tsuyu finished. Tokoyami nodded. Or our poor classmates who are playing the villains. Neither of them, I believe, could stop Dark Shadow if he were to become uncontrollable. Tsuyu frowned and thought about things. Based on this map, the 5th floor where the bomb is well lit. I think we should bring the fight up there and try to touch the bomb instead of capturing the villains. Tokoyami nodded. And if they bring the fight down to us trying to capture us, I suggest splitting up and you using your mobility to get the bomb. No. Tsuyu shook her head. I won't leave a teammate on their own. Especially if he's worried about getting in trouble himself. But I won't be on my own, I've got Dark Shadow dash, Tokoyami insisted. Tsuyu shook her head again. We move together. That's the only way we can secure a flawless victory against Kirishima and Shiro. Tokoyami stopped protesting and nodded. The preparation time ended and Tokoyami and Tsuyu were given the green light to move. Shiro and Kirishima had taken a lot of their preparation time to string up tape everywhere around the bomb to make it hard to get to and to tie up the heroes if they tried. We've only got 15 minutes, which isn't a lot since Kirishima and Shiro might be skilled in close combat. Tsuyu instructed, taking the lead as the person planning. She crouched on the ground. So let's take a page from Ochako's book and go up the building instead of climbing the stairs. They weren't planning on stopping on the 4th floor like Ochako. Azui was planning to go vertically all the way up, breaking through the window. Tokoyami nodded, doing as they planned, and pulled Dark Shadow out. Let's go. He agreed, and Tsuyu grabbed him by the waist with her tongue. Sorry, she tried to say. It was her first time wrapping her tongue around someone else. And she fumbled a bit, worrying that it was gross. It's fine. Your tongue is quite strong. Throw me up. Tokoyami instructed. Tsuyu threw Tokoyami up as far as she could. Dark Shadow used his claw talons to latch onto the windowsill and catch Tokoyami. Tokoyami grabbed a good foothold and secured himself. I'm good, Dark Shadow. Gets you? Dark Shadow smiled and let go and went down to pick up Tsuyu. And with that they perfectly executed Operation Leapfrog to climb the building. Like a bird, Tokoyami perched outside the 5th-floor window with Tsuyu on the other side. It looks like there's a light on the inside, so Dark Shadow should get slightly weaker. Would you do the honors? Tokoyami asked. I'd be happy to. Tsuyu smiled and kicked the window in. The glass shattered, allowing Tsuyu and Tokoyami to throw themselves into the room with the bomb without going through the door Kirishima and Shiro were guarding. Whoa. I didn't expect them to go through the window. Kirishima's arms were hardened as if to make blades. Too bad, even then we've trapped this whole room. Shiro would not give up and threw more tape out. Even if you are a frog, you won't be able to jump through the tiny cracks to get to the bomb. Tsuyu got ready in position to fight. Tokoyami smiled. I'll take Tokoyami, you take the frog girl and try to get her with the capture tape. Kirishima yelled at Shiro, I'm pumped up. Ready to fight man to man, or a man to bird. Kirishima wasn't exactly sure what Tokoyami was, to be honest. Tokoyami snorted and smiled. Tsuyu? Tsuyu smiled too. And then she leapt at Kirishima, making no play at all for the bomb. Kirishima tried to slice at her with his arm, and she tried to dodge, but it did get the edge or her leg, slicing at her costume. She kicked him in the chest, relying on her strong legs, but Kirishima hardened himself so he wouldn't be pushed back. Hey, I didn't think I would be your opponent. Are you even the combat type? I thought you'd go for the bomb? Kirishima asked. No, the plan was always for me to be the one who was in combat. Tsuyu smiled and shot her tongue out at Shiro. Shiro shot his tape out of his elbow, twisting up Tsuyu's tongue. In response, she kicked at Kirishima with her exposed leg this time. Thought that would work? I'm too strong for you to hit back? Kirishima pounded on his chest. He then stopped. Then he looked at his hand that she had touched with her leg with horror. And he started shaking it frantically. Why am I itchy? Tsuyu smiled as Shiro pulled her closer with his tape. She landed in his first layer of traps and tried to kick her way out. Tokoyami, you better do something instead of just leaving your partner to rot, Shiro yelled. Heroes win. All Might yelled in the mic. Shiro's eyes widened. Kirishima gasped and looked over at Tokoyami, who was smiling. A trail of black was leaking out of him. The villains looked behind them and saw a mass of black touching the bomb and giving a thumbs up, having expertly navigated the small holes between the tape. I was never leaving her alone. Tokoyami replied. If she got in danger, I plan to pull Dark Shadow back to fight you. I win, partner. And your other partner did great too. Dark Shadow cheered. Shiro lets you go. Aw man. I thought my tape was defense-proof. But I guess I didn't expect your quirk to be able to stretch itself and get so small. Kirishima was still itching. Azui, what the heck did you do to me? Sorry, Kirishima. Tsuyu apologized. You were too hard to press back, so I secreted an itching mucus from my skin to distract you. I did want all your attention to be on me instead of Tokoyami. Kirishima frowned. Tokoyami and Tsuyu smiled at each other. Great job, Dark Shadow. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have won against all that tape. Tsuyu pat Dark Shadow. Dark Shadow's eyes got large and happy. I think it's actually because of you that we won. I wouldn't have thought about going up the building. Nor would I have thought of using Dark Shadow to get the bomb. I would have fought Kirishima and Shiro head-on. But you took them on phenomenally well yourself. Tsuyu smiled and did a victory sign. The best of the match was of course Azui. All Might declared. Mina and Toru cheered. Tokoyami clapped. She was calm, collected, and was the master of planning. Not only that she relied on teamwork for all her members, she also displayed some wonderful tactics, like that vertical move that she planned with Tokoyami. Yayorozu analyzed. Not only that, but she fought bravely. I never expected her to be okay facing Kirishima. Yeah, he's pretty strong. Toru nodded, pretending to agree. Her fighting Kirishima was the obvious choice. But I wasn't aware Tsuyu could secrete mucus. Are there other types besides the itching one? Not only that, but she refused to even consider leaving a teammate behind and splitting up. Tokoyami, someone who had competed in the match, piped up, suddenly the #1 Azui fan. And she took into account Dark Shadow as a separate member instead of me just using my quirk. Not only could she fight on her own and distract, but she planned the whole encounter. Okay, that's enough, young Tokoyami. All Might tried to quiet him down. People who were in the match probably shouldn't discuss the reasons they think. Their teammates did well. After all, you weren't analyzing things through the cameras. It's part of their exam. He pointed out. Tokoyami stopped being so excited and quieted down. Wow. You made Tokoyami so talkative. I've never seen him talk so much, Tsu. Toru pointed out. I thought he was fine when we were working together. Tsuyu didn't seem to notice. Now, can anyone tell me what Kirishima and Shiro did wrong or what they could have done differently? Yaoyorozu raised her hand again. They should have taken into account the windows and that their enemies could have come through them and defended them better. Shiro laughed. Yeah, that one's on me. I should have taped that thing. I mean, I was fighting a frog. I just thought that Azui would be trying to jump through the tape and Tokoyami was going to take the door. It never occurred to us Tokoyami would scale the building too. All Might nodded. As long as you know your flaws. From the cameras it seemed like they were trying to fight their opponent head-on as if to be fair and just. As villains they shouldn't have worried about that. An ambush could have been a valid method of attack, but it never even occurred to them. Yaoyorozu pointed out again. It easily shows what kind of character they have. But at least they were the only ones to try to trap the room. Although that's more because of Shiro instead of Kirishima. Toru observed. 3 hero teams had won, and no villains. The deck felt heavily in favor of the heroes considering it seemed so hard for the villains to win. I thought fighting with someone I knew and got along with would make it easier. Kirishima groaned. Guess I was so excited I didn't do any tactics? He was still itching. Hey, Azui, do you have an antidote? I'm sorry, I don't. It should wear off in an hour. Tsuyu apologized. Ah man. Kirishima groaned. Toru pitied Yaoyorozu. For one she was paired with Mineta. For another she was on the villain team, so the deck was stacked up against her. It was match 4. Yaoyorozu and Mineta versus Jiro and Kaminari. So, what's the plan? Mineta asked. I could hang on your back and do a surprise attack and we could go down to the heroes. He rubbed his little hands together. Yaoyorozu glared. We will be doing my plan. I have yet to see Jiro and Kaminari in action, but first we will heavily fortify and trap the room. She started producing concrete block after concrete block and steel rod from her chest. Mineta watched not subtly. Yaoyorozu glared, not pausing for a moment from her production. Use your quirk to stick the slabs together. We will make another room to protect the bomb. They won't be able to get to it without risking breaking the bomb. But those concrete slabs are too heavy for my tiny little hands. Mineta whined, not intending to do any of the work. Yaoyorozu glared again and walked over to him grabbing a ball from his head. Stick the slabs together. Or else. He moaned and complained but did as he was told as Yaoyorozu quickly made her area. As soon as she was finished enforcing a room around the bomb, she started producing more things and Mineta stopped doing his job to watch. Mineta! I need you to work with me. Not get distracted. Yaoyorozu yelled. She turned around, now more self-conscious. She then started placing things on the pole around the room. What are those? Mineta asked, walking over to them. Should I put my balls on them? No. Yaoyorozu said harshly, they're mines. If they get too close to them, they'll explode the pillars supporting them and the ground. If all 4 pillars explode, they will obviously hurt the nuclear weapon and will thus lose because it would have exploded. That's not ideal for us either, which is why I put them on each pillar, so they'll be able to realize that they have to be slower and more careful in movement or they risk hurting all of us and numerous civilians. Yaoyorozu threw some on the ground and then created some paint to hide them. What do you want me to do? I still think we should go with the me hanging on your back plan. Mineta fake squeezed in the air. Yaoyorozu shuddered for a moment but kept her cool. I would like it if you climb down the wall and ambush them from behind. You can use your balls to climb, right? She tossed Mineta the tape. In a real scenario the fight doesn't end in 15 minutes. Capture will be our main goal. Mineta groaned. But I wanted to stay with you. After all, what happens if in a battle you and Jiro accidentally rip off each other's clothes and get exposed? He started drooling. Yaoyorozu glared at him. And what kind of situation would that ever happen? And if it did, how would you help? I'd witness it. Mineta gave a thumbs up. Yaoyorozu lost her cool for one moment and kicked him out the window. She sighed because the timer went off and the heroes were now able to enter the building. I suppose I'll wait for them in the hallway? She made one last thing, an elective protective blanket. After all, the hallways has less space for them to fight and maneuver around me, and I've heavily fortified this room. Kaminari and Jiro had finished mapping the floor. Jiro stuck her earjack into the wall and listened very close. So I was focused on trying to memorize the map, so I didn't really ask, but what can you even do? Kaminari asked. You mean you were focused on chattering? Jiro rubbed her forehead. She wasn't sure why Kaminari had been talking so much about how cool he was or what the plan was, but he had too much energy. I can plug my earjacks into anything and hear anything. The little grape diaper is on the wall outside, by the way. Can you zap him down? I told you I can't. I can only use my electricity once and then I'm pretty much useless. I can make little zaps in the meantime, but nothing that can get through concrete. Jiro sighed. One time? Really? Oh yeah, like you're better at combat. Kaminari rolled his eyes. I can plug my earjacks into the amp on my legs and let out the sounds of my own body to injure. So yeah, I am. Jiro growled. Wait, you mean like a fart? Kaminari asked, shocked. Jiro resisted the urge to whack him. No, like my heartbeat, dummy. Oh damn. That's strong. Kaminari realized. We're definitely going to win. Yaoyorozu's on the top floor in the hallway. Probably to keep us in a tight location to fight. Jiro continued listening. I'd like for you to go up and distract her since you did pretty good at distracting me during prep. You're welcome. Kaminari winked. But we've got little grape diaper to worry about who could come through any of the windows. Jiro groaned. Ugh, do you think we should focus on capture or obtaining the bomb? Despite not thinking much of Kaminari, she looked to her partner for advice. All the other teams won through getting the bomb, so we should probably ignore Mineta and go to the bomb. Jiro nodded. Then, use your one-hit KO move on Yaoyorozu. She's a recommendation student, so she's bound to be tough. And she's guarding the way into the bomb. Kaminari nodded. Got it? He started letting off sparks randomly. Only a little bit though. To scare Mineta. The two started going up the stairs. They eventually found Mineta on the 3rd floor, catching his breath. You try to climb down a wall. It's hard. He glared at them, just watching him lie on the ground. I'm sick of this. I don't even get to see Yaoyorozu and Jiro tear each other's clothes off. He stomped his feet on the ground. Wait, the hot recommendation student and Jiro are going to tear each other's clothes off? This I gotta see. Kaminari was momentarily distracted. We are not. Oh god, I don't even know where he got that gross idea. Jiro protested. Jiro and Kaminari were momentarily distracted for two very different reasons. Mineta grinned and threw his ball straight at Kaminari's leg to get him stuck. Oh no you don't. Jiro yelled and plugged her jack into her leg. The vibrations of the air threw the ball back and it hit the floor instead of Kaminari. Thanks. Kaminari frowned. Mineta fell to the ground, his ears hurting quite a bit. No fair. He screamed. He threw ball after ball. I guess I should up the sound, huh? Jiro grinned, some of the wall falling apart from the loud sound and giving her a slab of concrete to hide behind. She upped the sound of her heartbeat and directed it fully at Mineta. Ah! He collapsed behind his tower of balls. Get the capture tape, Kaminari, and tie him up. Jiro instructed. Kaminari nodded. Sorry, I'll tell you all about Jiro and Yaoyorozu tearing each other's clothes off later. I'll take their bodies to memory. He apologized to Mineta. For the last time, that isn't going to happen. Jiro yelled and the two continued upstairs. They found Yaoyorozu waiting for them in the hallway outside of the room she was supposed to guard. She had a cape on that was not part of her previous hero costume and a metal pole that was clearly going to be her weapon. Welcome, heroes. It's lovely to meet you. Although I'm sorry to say it will be our first and last meeting. Yaoyorozu addressed, taking a page out of Ida's textbook and role-playing the part of a villain. Jiro smiled back and got her fists out, ready to fight. She was clearly getting pumped. Don't worry, I'll visit you often in jail after I capture you. She replied back playfully. Yaoyorozu's here. It's time for me to shine. We just need to capture one more of them to win. Kaminari darted forward. Kaminari, wait. We should wait to see what her plan is in the bomb room. Jiro tried to get him to wait, but Kaminari would not be stopped. He let out his burst of really strong electricity. Jiro quickly took sanctuary behind a wall to not be hurt too. But Yaoyorozu had prepared for that. She threw her blanket/cape over herself, and Kaminari's attack was ineffective. Jiro bit her lip because she could no longer attack Yaoyorozu with her sound attack with Kaminari right in the way. Kaminari stopped in his tracks after he let his energy out. She had an insulated sheet? This is why I told you to wait, idiot. Jiro growled, but Kaminari was already useless, just giving big thumbs up. Yaoyorozu threw off the blanket now that Kaminari was no longer attacking and ran forward, quickly wrapping the tape around him. I believe I heard him say you had already captured my minion? She asked. We're 1 versus 1 now. She smiled, holding Kaminari, who wasn't even struggling. Jiro frowned. Well, I'm still not out for the count. She moved her earphone down for her leg. Yaoyorozu shook her head and shook her finger. I wouldn't do that. I have your partner as my hostage now. She held Kaminari, who was just smiling dumbly. You wouldn't attack your partner, would you? Jiro frowned. He's down for the count anyway. And I'm sure he wouldn't mind being sacrificed for the win. She let out a loud sound from her legs. Immediately Yaoyorozu dropped Kaminari and jumped back, covering her ears. She shook but produced headphones from her chest again. That creation quirk is rather amazing. But I just have to make my quirk louder than your headphones? Jiro declared, upping her sound as Yaoyorozu put on her headphones. The walls were starting to crumble from the sound pressure. The iron door behind Yaoyorozu to protect the bomb was being slightly crushed. Kaminari's ears were now bleeding as he lay in the capture tape on the ground. It's a pity I won't be able to hear your beautiful voice anymore, but these headphones will protect me. Still, you're tough. I'll give you that. I suppose I should stop playing so on the defensively. And with that she tried to move forward against the sound pressure. Be beautiful? That caught Jiro off guard for a second. Her heartbeat accelerated, causing a harsher attack. Yaoyorozu hadn't anticipated that to happen from her role-playing. She created a metal shield hoping to protect herself as she moved forward. Jiro was momentarily distracted and Yaoyorozu leapt over Kaminari's body. She then attacked Jiro with her metal baton and shield. Jiro raised her arms to defend herself and instinctively raised her leg too to try to swipe away the baton, disrupting her attack. That was what Yaoyorozu was anticipating, and she swiped at the earjack, pulling it from the leg with the baton. She dropped her metal shield now that it was no longer needed and grabbed Jiro's wrist with her other arm. Jiro apparently hadn't expected Yaoyorozu to be so close, and this caused her to fumble again, neglecting to plug in her earjacks immediately. Yaoyorozu smiled confidently and spun Jiro around, pulling Jiro's wrist along with her behind Jiro's back. She dropped her baton and pulled her other arm Jiro's stomach as if embracing her from behind. Yaoyorozu had more hand-to-hand combat experience than Jiro and was easily able to hold her in place. That caused Jiro's face to heat up even more, since she really was essentially being held down and embraced from behind. Got you? Yaoyorozu whispered. But Jiro was so distracted by the sensation of Yaoyorozu's hand on hers, her being pressed against Yaoyorozu's chest, and the whisper of Yaoyorozu's voice that she didn't even notice Yaoyorozu tie her up with the tape. Villains win. All Might called. And Yaoyorozu let her go and sighed, taking off her headphones. I'm sorry about that, Jiro. Jiro dropped to her knees, blushing heavily. I guess it really is easy to get lost in character. I'm rather disappointed honestly by you and Kaminari. I set up this whole cool trap and all, and you two didn't even make it to it. But I suppose a win is a win. And you were very tough. My ears are still ringing even with the headphones. I don't think I can hear. Yaoyorozu admitted. That's all right, I'm sorry. Jiro covered her mouth. Good show? I mean good game. You did great is what I mean. I knew we wouldn't be able to win against a recommendation student. Yaoyorozu just blinked because she could not hear. All Might blinked when Yaoyorozu, Jiro, Kaminari and Mineta got back. Kaminari and Mineta both had to go to the nurses like Midoriya, although Yaoyorozu insisted that she'd be able to hear in a few minutes and didn't need to leave. Okay, so the best person in the match was clearly Yaoyorozu. She pretty much single-handedly took on the heroes, preparing for Kaminari's and Jiro's quirk and defending herself. Not only that, but she prepared protection for the bomb and a trap to be used against the heroes. And she dedicated herself to the craft of being a villain. But can anyone else tell me what she did wrong? All Might asked. Yaoyorozu blinked, having no idea she was being criticized. She made us all watch that. Bakugo suggested. Kirishima nodded, and Ochako couldn't help but blush. It wasn't wrong or anything. It just felt a little too personal to watch. Everyone seemed a little frazzled and blushing. There's nothing wrong with a homoerotic villainous hero display. Aoyama defended. I believe many medias have been dedicated to them. It was embarrassing though. Bakugo insisted. No, her dedication to her character was to be admired. And it caught Jiro off guard. All Might explained. If not for her dedication, Jiro might have had a chance at winning and beating her. All Might pointed out. Jiro blushed and didn't make eye contact with anyone. She really had lost because of a pretty girl. Was it perhaps her abandoning her teammate? Tsuyu asked. All Might smiled. Bingo. Both Jiro and Yaoyorozu struggled with teamwork. Yaoyorozu should have gotten a plan that Mineta was more on board with and enthusiastic about, and perhaps shouldn't have split up. After all, even though the villains won, it wasn't an overwhelming victory since Jiro and Kaminari were able to capture Mineta. All Might pointed out. Yaoyorozu kicked him out of a window which he clearly wasn't prepared for. How is someone supposed to cooperate with someone they can't reason with? Toru wondered. Yaoyorozu's refusal to work with Mineta after a point and just kick him out of a window looked like something to be respected to her. After all, Mineta had added nothing to the team, and based on Jiro's reaction to certain events, Kaminari and Mineta were likely both saying creepy things. No point reasoning with heroes, I suppose, and I'll probably have to figure out how to look like I'm working with them eventually. Jiro did this to a worse extent, of course. She and Kaminari didn't discuss a plan ahead of time, causing Kaminari to rush into action, injuring himself. She then used him as a meat shield. All Might pointed out. Seemed like a legitimate course of action if you asked me. Bakugo grunted. How else was she supposed to win against a villain at that point? Young Bakugo, you never ever abandon a hostage and instead attack them instead. All Might scolded. Bakugo looked like he was about to argue back. Even if the hostage is a pro-hero, you just don't attack your allies. Jiro, if I was a teacher like Aizawa, I would ask for an essay on my desk about why you shouldn't injure your own allies, even if they've used up all their power. But I do not have a rubric for grading, so you're off the hook for now. All Might told her. Jiro sighed. But still, I am very disappointed. All Might crossed his arms, making his best smiling while scolding look. Jiro nodded and looked to the ground sadly. I don't see the big deal. People are giving Kaminari and Mineta way too much credit. Kaminari's the one who got in the way. Toru frowned. What else was she supposed to do? Give up? Or would All Might just say plus ultra, try harder? Toru was tired of watching awful people get away with their mistakes. Bakugo wasn't criticized too harshly for trying to kill someone, but Jiro was criticized for using her useless comrade as a meat shield. How much longer would this practice, and her having to stand there but naked, go on for? It's my turn next. Mina smiled, tapping Toru's clothed hand to get her attention. Wish me luck. Good luck. The fifth match, Mina was paired with Aoyama as the heroes against Sato and Koda. Unlike the other pairs of students, there wasn't much planning by either team before the 5 minutes were up. Let's just charge in there. Take down the villains and achieve victory. Mina declared. Oui. Aoyama nodded, agreeing. With my beautiful laser and your slime, we should be able to defeat any foe easily. It's acid. Mina frowned. And Sato and Koda don't look like the type to plan very much, so I think it would only make the most sense if we charged in there. In fact, Sato and Koda weren't planning at all either. Let's fight here on our home turf, Sato suggested, a Kit Kat in hand, so he was ready to buff up. You cool with that? Koda looked miserable. He tried to open his mouth to respond but just nodded hurriedly, clearly too shy to openly communicate with Sato. I can't believe I'm a villain, oh no. I don't want the villains to win even though I'm playing them. He was very distracted and not at all in the right headspace for this practical. Mina and Aoyama entered the building, with Mina doing the bare minimum of memorization of the floor plan. She had tried her hardest, of course, but memorization wasn't her strong suit. She slid around on her acid as Aoyama walked in front of her just looking cool. We should both focus on the bomb when we get upstairs. After all, millions of fake civilians are at stake. Mina reminded Aoyama. I think we have this in the bag. I'm not sure what Koda's quirk is, but Sato seems to be just strength and I think I can outrun him. She was so excited for her own exam that she threw her acid into the air like fireworks. It hit Aoyama's glittery cape. "No!" he cried, "my sparkles." Mina kept sliding along as Aoyama stopped in his tracks. "It's just a cape. Come on, we have to hurry," she called from down the hallway after realizing Aoyama was not following. Aoyama was sniffling greatly. But, I need my cape." "No, you don't. Come on," Mina scolded. Aoyama sniffled some more but eventually bucked up and reluctantly followed. Due to Mina's speed and Aoyama's ability to jump upstairs thanks to his naval laser, the two got to the top floor quick enough, even though Mina led them down a few dead ends. They finally reached Koda and Sato. "So, you're here?" Sato flexed. "Don't think you'll be able to beat us." "Koda, get the tape," Sato ordered. Koda fumbled and grabbed the capture tape. You're the one who won't be able to beat us," Mina declared. Aoyama jumped to the bomb. "That's our goal." Aoyama nodded and launched off. Sato downed his Kit Kat and rushed across the room to try to grab Aoyama. "Oh no you don't." Mina threw acid from her hands and it hit Sato in the arm. Sato let out a loud scream and jumped instinctively backwards towards the bomb. Koda fumbled but put his arms out to stop Aoyama. Since Aoyama couldn't change his direction mid-air, Koda caught him in his arms and was able to get the tape around him. "Sorry, with holes in my cape I couldn't slow myself," Aoyama snidely said as Koda captured him. Sato didn't have enough brain power from his sugar rush to order Koda to do anything different or for him to use his quirk, not that there was any animals in the area in the unfortunately clean fake city. He just let out a low growl and charged at Mina now that one of her teammates had been caught. "Your sacrifice won't be in vain, Aoyama." Mina jumped over Sato as he charged at her, careful to slick her heels with acid and hit his back, causing him to let out another scream of pain. She then slid at full speed over to the bomb. Koda looked frantically between Mina and Sato but eventually moved away from his defensive position in front of the bomb to his teammate to aid him and help him up. Mina grinned and easily slid into place, touching the bomb. "Heroes win. I win." Mina smiled at All Might's voice. She started jumping up and down, hands still on the bomb. She felt the papier-mâché of the bomb crumbling a bit. She had forgotten her hands still had acid on them. The paper created a dark hole in it. "Oops. I mean villains win. I suppose?" All Might's voice boomed. Mina looked incredibly frustrated when her team was called back. Sato had been sent to the nurse's office, so only Koda and Aoyama remained to hear the results. "Well, that was a mess, but chin up, young ones. It was your first mock battle, and none of you had any experience. Can any of you tell me what they all did wrong?" All Might asked. "It's all right, Mina." Toru pat her back. "I was so close to winning. I almost single-handedly won for my team despite Aoyama's whole pity party over his cape, and then I had to blow it up by burning the bomb. I would have killed millions if I were in the field." Mina yelled at herself. "Everyone makes mistakes. And you don't have much practice in using your quirk in battle, do you, Mina?" Tsuyu pointed out. "You had great mobility." Yaoyorozu raised her hand to analyze, her ears finally returning. "Well, Sato I think did the best he could. He attacked and charged and decided at the beginning to play defensively and fight on his home turf. The villain team could have better prepared their home turf and defended in the 5 minutes of planning, but due to Mina's acid I doubt moving around blocks could have stopped much." All Might nodded. "Sometimes the heroes don't have time to plan and rushing in headfirst is the best course of action. Both teams should have started up some communication and planning on their ends though during the limited time they had. Yaoyorozu nodded. Koda also, well, he didn't exactly help the villain team. I didn't really see him using his quirk. He captured Aoyama though. That was something, Shiro pointed out. He blocked off Aoyama's path and caught him in midair. It looked like his heart wasn't fully into the exercise though. Toru pointed out, deciding to try to speak up a little and not appear completely aloof. Were you having a tough time playing a villain, Koda? Koda looked flustered and nodded, blushing. There weren't any animals in the area either. He signed with his hands quickly. Usually there's some rats in indoor buildings, but I think UA chased them all out. All Might looked flustered after someone translated for him. Yes, that does seem to be an oversight. I will talk to Principal Nizu about making our indoor cities more accurate, since it seems like you were at an unfair advantage and couldn't use your quirk because of that. But young Koda, you have to get yourself into the correct headspace for work, even if it's a job you don't exactly like. All Might scolded. Koda nodded, looking like a kicked puppy. Not only that, but I'm sure there were some bugs in the buildings that you could have used. All Might tried to help. Koda frantically shook his head, looking terrified. All Might was confused for a moment but cleared his throat, deciding not to ask about it. Now the hero team, could someone tell me what Mina and Aoyama did wrong? Since they initially looked like they were going to win. All Might requested. Well, Aoyama also didn't have the right headspace for the test. He immediately became more distressed about his wounded pride via his cape dissolving than the exam, and even stopped in his tracks. He didn't have a backup plan after he used his naval laser to leap into the air. It was as if he could only do one thing. Yaoyorozu scolded. Aoyama looked even more sad when Yaoyorozu said that. Not to say that Ishido's overexcitableness wasn't its own problem. Her acid caused not only damage to her own ally but the bomb as well. And although she seemed to do mobility pretty well, she could have probably benefited from some more memorization of the floor plan going through several dead ends. And just like Todoroki, her acid in an actual combat scenario could be dangerous enough to cause death to the enemy if she's not careful. Yaoyorozu explained. Mina gasped, having not thought about that. No, I'm pretty sure all I could cause is acid burns, but that is pretty dangerous and painful. Oh man, poor Sato, I gotta apologize to him. All Might nodded. Well, this was your first practical, so there's bound to be mistakes. In fact, I'm surprised this was the first bomb Class A accidentally triggered. As long as you learn your own weaknesses and grow from those, I'm sure you'll do plus ultra next time. Everybody nodded. It had been an exciting first class, but a stressful one. And Toru was more than happy for everyone's weaknesses to be exposed right in front of her face.